Hey, some more packages arrived today, Hugo called out. What's in them? I asked. Oh, just some fishing gear. A colleague at work invited me to go fishing, so I bought some new stuff. Fishing gear? I felt uneasy seeing my husband Hugo's excitement. Didn't you buy fishing gear when we first got married and never used it? I was too busy to go, but that old gear is outdated. If I'm going, I need new stuff. I see. Is there a problem with that? Hugo's tone became defensive. It's not that, but my colleague was kind enough to invite me. I can't just say no. I have work, you know. I can't dwell on sentiment like you do. I understood what Hugo was saying, but it was hard to believe we were a couple sharing the same sorrow when he seemed so happy, like nothing had happened. I'm Cynthia, 33 years old, and we've been married for 6 years. Hugo was making these fishing plans just 2 months after our daughter passed away. I still couldn't get over my grief, but I couldn't understand how Hugo seemed so unaffected. My father-in-law, Wilson, passed away in our 2nd year of marriage. He adored his granddaughter and loved her more than anything. I wonder if they're together in heaven now. That's the only thought that comforts me. Before he died, Wilson told me, don't let Hugo and your mother-in-law Rachel handle the money. I realized after getting married that Hugo and Rachel are big spenders. They spend without thinking if they have money. That's why Wilson always managed the finances. Wilson was a gentle soul, always looking out for me. Having no family of my own, he was like a real father to me, and his death hit me hard. Our daughter, Laura, was born a year after our marriage. She was such a bright and cheerful girl, always bringing light into our lives. Mom, everyone's so jealous of my packed lunch. I bet it's the best in preschool. Then Mom will have to try even harder. Mom, can I ask for a little favor? What is it? Can you make more food for my next packed lunch? I want to eat more. Can you eat that much? I won't leave any, I promise. Okay, I'll do it. The following month, Laura's preschool teacher quietly told me something. There was a child in class who never had a mom and whose dad was too busy with work to make a packed lunch, always bringing just a supermarket sandwich and an apple. Laura had been sharing her packed lunch with this child. Laura's packed lunch is more than I can eat, so please help me eat it, she would say, splitting it in half. Hearing this, I was so proud of Laura. Such a kind and wonderful child. Every expression of Laura's, her angry face, her crying face, and her brightest smiles, were all treasures to me. And then one day, that treasure was suddenly gone. The night before, Laura went to bed as usual, just a bit earlier than normal. I'm sleepy, she said, but I just thought she was tired from preschool. After watching Laura start to breathe softly in her sleep, I left the bed. Usually Laura and I sleep together. After Laura fell asleep, I cleaned up dinner, took a shower after Rachel did, finished cleaning the shower room, and by the time I returned to the bedroom, it was almost midnight. Hugo was away on a business trip that night. Laura was lying quietly in bed. I thought she was sleeping well, but as I was about to get into bed, I noticed something was wrong. I couldn't hear Laura's breathing. What? I reached out to touch Laura's cheek. It was noticeably colder than usual. Laura, what's wrong? Laura was completely unresponsive. I couldn't understand what was happening, but I knew I had to call an ambulance. I jumped in with Laura, clutching her cold hand. As soon as the paramedics saw her, I noticed a grim expression on their faces. One of them began as they rushed her to the hospital. Laura, you'll be okay, right? You'll get better once we're at the hospital, right? I repeated these words to myself, desperately hoping they were true. But when we arrived, the first thing the doctor said was, I'm terribly sorry, but she's already gone. I became frantic, begging the doctor to examine Laura over and over. It couldn't be true. She was fine before bed. The cause was unknown. These sudden events can happen even with small children, the doctor said. I had heard such things before, but never imagined it could happen to my own child. Laura and I had only lived together for 4 short years. I thought we had decades ahead of us. I couldn't believe she was suddenly gone. Overwhelmed, I panicked and passed out. When I woke up, Hugo and Rachel were there, having been notified of what happened. I realized I had forgotten to call Rachel when I left the house. Where's Laura? I hoped it was all a bad dream, but Hugo gestured that she was gone. How can this be? Neither Hugo nor Rachel said anything, but their eyes seemed to confirm my worst fears. For a while, I was almost catatonic. I cried looking at Laura's things, cried watching her favorite cartoons, and cried remembering her in everything I did. At first, Hugo didn't say anything, but gradually he began to sigh audibly and mutter, "She's so morbid." Rachel too started to nag me. "Hey, how long are you going to be in a daze? Housework is Cynthia's job, isn't it? Could you please get it together?" "I'm sorry," I said, knowing I shouldn't be like this. But my heart was heavy and I just couldn't function as efficiently as before. Yet, as they say, time heals. About 6 months later, I started to manage the daily routines normally again. Hugo did cry a bit at the funeral, but he was never what you would call a doting father. He preferred playing games over spending time with Laura, which is why she wasn't very attached to him. Maybe Hugo wasn't as heartbroken because he didn't feel much of a connection as a parent. But who else will mourn for Laura, our daughter who only lived for 4 years, if not her parents? About a month after Laura's death, Hugo returned to his usual spendthrift self, enjoying shopping and browsing the web. When Laura died, both Hugo and Rachel looked at me as if it was my fault, like they were silently blaming me. But they didn't say anything, probably because they weren't as heartbroken about her absence as I was. I didn't expect them to grieve the same way, but I wish Hugo, as a parent who lost a child, would have been more supportive. Rachel, on the other hand, went back to her routine within a week. She resumed shopping, going out with friends, and laughing as if Laura had never existed. When Laura was born, Rachel frowned upon seeing her face. "She looks more like Cynthia than Hugo. We can't expect much from her future," she would say. She often ignored Laura and seemed reluctant to interact with her, probably not feeling any special affection. She didn't shed a tear at the funeral. Their attitudes have always been a point of contention for me. Almost a year passed since Laura's death, and seeing Hugo and Rachel happily shopping, I felt an indescribable frustration. They never talked to Laura's picture. How could they act so normally? It seemed like we couldn't understand each other at all. Then one day, Hugo and Rachel suggested we go out together. "Where are we going?" I asked. "How about somewhere with fresh air to change our mood?" Hugo suggested. "Cynthia, you've been just going between home and the supermarket since Laura passed. That's why you're so down." "I've been worried about you too, Cynthia," Rachel added. "You've been so down." "Worried, you, Rachel?" "Of course. Cynthia is the wife of our dear son. I've been trying hard for your sake." I couldn't fully believe that, but a part of me felt a little happy to hear it. "How about hiking for a change?" Hugo continued. "Going somewhere with fresh air might lift your spirits. I want you to feel a bit better." "You really thought that?" "Of course, I'm your husband. It's natural to worry about my wife." "But you didn't seem that down." "I was holding it together. If I got down too, the house would become too gloomy. So let's go hiking." I wondered if they really cared, but it was hard to believe. "Laura would want you to be happy, Cynthia. Think of this as a tribute to her," Hugo said. That moved me. I knew Laura wouldn't want me to cry forever. That's something I've always known in my head. "But I've never hiked before," I said. "Don't worry, even I can climb it. It's more like a light hike," Hugo reassured me. "Well, if Hugo and Rachel insist." "Great, I'm looking forward to it." So I agreed to go hiking with Hugo and Rachel. We drove to the foot of the mountain and started our ascent. It was a sunny day and many people were around, which felt reassuring. But as we reached the midway point, the crowd thinned, despite being told it was a beginner's course. I was surprised by the roughness of the terrain, yet Hugo and Rachel walked with ease, familiar with the area. "Hey, let's take this path," Hugo suggested. "Ha! Yeah, it looks less crowded. Let's go that way," Rachel agreed. "But shouldn't we follow the path everyone else is taking?" I asked, feeling uneasy. "It's fine. I've been here before and know the way. This path is straightforward, and you can't get lost," Hugo reassured me. "If Hugo says it's okay, then it must be," Rachel added. "Trust me, there's a really scenic spot just ahead, Cynthia. You'll be amazed." Before finishing his sentence, Hugo started walking down the path, followed by Rachel. Reluctantly, I followed them, but the further we went, the more rugged the path became, almost like a trail for animals rather than a proper path. "Wait, are you sure we're on the right path? Can we really get through here?" I asked, my concern growing. "Don't worry, we'll reach a wider path soon. Just keep up," Hugo said confidently. Hugo and Rachel continued, seemingly sure of themselves. Rachel, now 60, was surprisingly nimble, walking more effortlessly than I was. Soon they were far ahead, their figures intermittently visible through the dense foliage. "Wait, don't leave me behind here," I called out. Hurry up. We'll run out of daylight. Hugo's voice echoed from the distance. I hurried, but couldn't catch up. Their heads, once visible, were now out of sight. Hugo, Rachel, I called out in fear, but no reply came. As I moved forward, I lost sight of them completely. I didn't know which way to go. What should I do? I was lost, the words stranded, echoing in my mind. This can't be happening. Maybe I should have stayed put, thinking Hugo would come back for me. But as time passed, neither Hugo nor Rachel appeared. There was no sign of anyone approaching. Knowing I couldn't just stand there, I started walking again, filled with fear. My anxiety grew as I realized I couldn't tell which way was which. I decided to retrace my steps, but even finding my own tracks on this unmarked path was a challenge. I felt like I was getting deeper into the wilderness. Panicking, I stumbled several times, each fall draining more energy. Soon, the surroundings began to darken, and my anxiety intensified. If night fell, I wouldn't be able to descend. The temperature dropped as evening approached. It was late March, but the nights were still cold, especially in the mountains. What would happen if I had to spend the night here? Exhausted, I collapsed against a large tree. I can't go on. I voiced my despair. Thoughts of this being the end of my life crept in, my consciousness fading. In my dimming awareness, I heard a voice I had longed to hear. Mom, Mom. Shocked, I opened my eyes. There was my dear Laura. Laura, is that you? Laura smiled at me. Ah, I must be in heaven, I thought hazily. I reached out to hug Laura, but she seemed to slip through my arms, flying away. Laura, Mom is over here. Laura turned and started running. Wait, I reflexively stood up to follow Laura, feeling strangely energized despite my earlier exhaustion. This couldn't be the real world, but if it meant holding Laura again, I didn't care if it was a dream. When I thought of that, I naturally felt motivated. I felt invigorated and chased after Laura. Laura, wait, I called. Laura turned back, smiling. It felt like playing tag with Laura, a joyful feeling. Before I knew it, I had reached the foot of the mountain, and Laura was gone. Laura, where are you? Laura was nowhere to be seen. Had I just seen an illusion? Then someone shone a flashlight on me. Are you okay? I got lost on the trail. Are you hurt? Thank you, I'm fine. My family must be waiting for me. I headed down to the parking lot at the foot of the mountain, but our car wasn't there. Had Hugo and Rachel left without me? No way. As I stood there dumbfounded, I saw a faint image of Laura where her car should have been. Laura. I ran towards her, but my body passed right through. I couldn't embrace her. Laura looked sad, as if she wanted to tell me something. I felt she had a message for me. Then I realized something was very wrong. If we had been separated, they would have reported me missing. The area should have been in an uproar, but no one seemed to be looking for me. The parking lot was silent and deserted. Did Hugo and Rachel not even try to find me? What does this mean? Laura must have appeared to show me this. I went to the station and took a train home. I noticed people staring at me curiously, but I was too preoccupied to care. I quietly opened the door and peeked inside. I could hear Hugo and Rachel's voices, unnaturally cheerful. I sneaked into the next room and observed them through a gap in the sliding door. They were drinking and laughing, unconcerned that I hadn't returned. We did it. No more of her depressing face. Hugo said, Wonder how she's doing now, shivering in the mountains. Just thinking about it makes me laugh. Cynthia is so slow, she'll never make it back, Rachel added. It's going to be extra cold tonight. Imagine her alone and cold out there. We'll tell people she ran off with another man, then file a missing person report. When will we get the insurance money? Hugo asked. It'll take a few years before she's declared legally missing. If only her body was found, we'd get it faster. Let's say she called from the mountain. Then they'll find her sooner. My son is so clever, Rachel praised. Hearing this, I trembled with anger. I couldn't believe they had planned this. I listened to their conversation, unnoticed. I was a fool to ever think of them as family. Make sure to cry at the funeral, Hugo said. You didn't shed a tear for Laura. Well, I wasn't sad. Laura wasn't cute. She looked just like Cynthia. Rachel replied, I never wanted kids. They're just annoying. Hearing this, I burst open the sliding door. Hugo and Rachel looked at me in surprise, their expressions frozen in shock. Hugo backed up against the wall while Rachel covered her head with a throw. I realized I must have looked like a ghost covered in mud, with torn clothes and scratches. I decided to play along. I'll haunt you. I declared, my voice echoing through the room. They shivered in fear. It wasn't me. Blame Hugo, Rachel yelled. What? You agreed. Mom was the one laughing about how cold it must be. Hugo protested. It's not my fault. Haunt her. Hugo pleaded. Hugo, selling out your own mother. What if I get haunted? Rachel said, terrified. I'm sorry. Please go to heaven. They begged, beyond reason. They must have really thought they had sent me to the afterlife. I'm still very much alive, I said, lifting my foot to show them. They looked utterly bewildered. What was your plan, leaving me in the middle of the mountains? I just wanted to fulfill your wish, Hugo stammered. You wanted to see Laura, right? I thought I'd send you to her. It was out of kindness. I was speechless. Did they really think that excuse would hold up? I heard your entire conversation, I informed them. Their faces turned even paler. Of course I'll be divorcing Hugo. I can't stay here, not with my life on the line. Too bad you won't get the insurance money. I recorded your conversation. I'm taking it to the police. What? I'll consult a lawyer and you'll face the consequences. Cynthia's fine, right? We didn't commit any crime. I won't let this go unpunished. Perhaps it was seeing Laura that gave me strength or knowing their evil intentions, but I felt the newfound power within me. I wasn't going to lose. Rachel, still unable to believe I was alive, peeked out from under her throw at Hugo, and me, still trembling. On the contrary, I wanted to ask myself, do I look that much like a ghost? I didn't bother with their stunned faces and began gathering my belongings to leave the house. I had no destination in mind but managed to find a no-frills hotel. I was grateful for the savings I had hidden before marriage. Hugo and Rachel didn't know I had savings. They would have demanded it if they did. The next day, I visited the police and a lawyer's office. Abandoning a healthy adult in the mountains might not constitute abandonment, but intentionally leaving someone in a dangerous place was illegal. Some punishment was inevitable. My lawyer said I could claim damages for emotional distress. My recording of their conversation led to their arrest for fraud and assault, resulting in a criminal sentence. The divorce was finalized and I claimed compensation and damages. I had secretly saved money just as Wilson advised, slowly transferring small amounts from our living expenses account to another one. Even though the savings were from after marriage, all payments were made to me, leaving Hugo with nothing. I found a place to live and a job. I'll never overcome the grief of losing Laura, but I cherish the happy memories we shared. As long as I have these memories, I won't be lonely. Laura saved my life. She wanted me to live. I'm the only one who can cherish her memories. I'm not alone. Laura's smiling face is always with me. Mom, I love your smile, Laura often said. So I'll keep smiling. The smile Laura loved, and move forward.
I'm Kelly, and John and I met right after I finished college. He swept me off my feet with his charm and ambition. Before I knew it, we were married and living in the apartment he'd bought before our wedding. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was ours, and I loved every bit of it. Our daughter Sarah came along soon after. She was perfect, John's blue eyes and my curly hair. I thought we had it all, a loving family, a cozy home, and promising careers ahead of us. I landed a job as a secretary at a small but growing company. The pay wasn't great, but I enjoyed the work and got along well with my coworkers. John, on the other hand, was making his way up at his construction firm. He'd come home with stories of big projects and even bigger deals. I was proud of him, even if his long hours meant I was often alone with Sarah. But something changed in John over time. He'd come home late, eyes narrowed with suspicion. Who called, he'd demand, or why were you all dressed up? At first, I laughed it off, but soon his jealousy became suffocating. One night, after he'd grilled me about a work event, I confronted him. You think I'm cheating? With who, John? The mailman? He didn't crack a smile. Don't play dumb, Kelly. I see how men look at you. And that boss of yours is happily married with 3 kids, I cut him off. For God's sake, John, I'm your wife. I love you. But my words fell on deaf ears. The arguments became more frequent, each one chipping away at our marriage. I was faithful, always had been, always would be. But John's distrust was like a poison, seeping into every part of our lives. Through it all, Sarah remained blissfully unaware. At 10 years old, her world revolved around school, friends, and her iPad. I tried to shield her from our fights, but kids always know more than we think. The irony wasn't lost on me. John was the one always coming home late, always going on business trips. If anyone had reason to be suspicious, it was me. But I trusted him. I believed in our vows, in our love. Why couldn't he do the same? One night, after a particularly nasty fight, I found myself staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. John's soft snores filled the room, but I felt miles away from him. How had we gotten here? When had love turned to suspicion, trust to accusation? I thought about leaving, about taking Sarah and starting over. But where would we go? What kind of life could I give her on a secretary's salary? And despite everything, I still loved John. I loved the man he used to be, the man I hoped he could be again. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, life threw me another curveball. My mom, the rock I'd always leaned on, had a stroke. It hit out of nowhere, leaving us all reeling. Mom had always been the picture of health. After Dad died, she'd thrown herself into gardening and book clubs, determined to live life to the fullest. She lived in this gorgeous house in the fancy part of town, courtesy of Dad's life insurance and smart investments. I used to joke that she was living the life of a retired movie star. But that Tuesday morning changed everything. I got the call at work. Mom couldn't speak, couldn't move her left side. I rushed to the hospital, my heart in my throat. The next few weeks were a blur of hospitals, doctors, and terrifying medical jargon. I went to every top-notch clinic in the area, desperate for someone to tell me Mom would be okay. But the prognosis wasn't good. The stroke had left her bedridden, needing round-the-clock care. I was overwhelmed. How could I take care of Mom, manage my job, look after Sarah, and deal with John's jealousy all at once? It felt like drowning in slow motion. Then, out of the blue, John came up with an idea. "We should move into your mom's house," he said one night over dinner. I nearly choked on my pasta. "What?" "Think about it, Kelly," he continued, his eyes lighting up. "It's a great house in a fantastic neighborhood. Sarah would have her own room, maybe even a playroom. Your mom needs care, and you'd be right there. Plus, we could rent out this apartment for some extra cash." I had to admit, it made sense. Mom's house was way nicer than our apartment, and the idea of not having to commute to take care of her was appealing. But still, it felt weird. "I don't know, John," I hesitated. "It's Mom's house. We can't just barge in." "Ask her," he insisted. "I bet she'd love the company. It's better than a nursing home, right?" He had a point there. Mom had made it crystal clear she didn't want to end up in a glorified prison for old people, as she called it. Maybe this could work. The next day, I broached the subject with Mom. To my surprise, her face lit up at the idea. "Oh, Kelly," she said, her voice weak but excited. "I'd love that. This old house needs some life in it again." And just like that, it was decided. We were moving into Mom's house. As I started packing up our apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something big. I just didn't know if it was something good or bad. John was over the moon about the move. He kept talking about the garden he'd plant, the man cave he'd set up in the basement. Even Sarah seemed excited about having a bigger room. The move to Mom's house brought a whole new set of challenges. I quickly realized that taking care of a stroke patient was a full-time job, one I wasn't equipped to handle alone. After a week of sleepless nights and stress-filled days, I hired a nurse to help out during the day. Nurse Jenny was a godsend. She came in every morning at 8 and stayed until 6, taking care of Mom's basic needs. But evenings and nights were all on me. I'd come home from work, exhausted, only to start my second shift as Mom's caretaker. The stroke had affected her speech, leaving her frustrated and often silent. I'd change her diaper, giving her as much dignity as I could in the process. Then came the sponge bath, the massage to keep her muscles from atrophying, the meds, and finally, dinner. It was grueling work, both physically and emotionally. Seeing my vibrant, independent mother reduced to this state broke my heart every day. But I did it because I loved her, because she'd have done the same for me. What I didn't expect was Sarah's reaction to her grandmother's condition. At 11, I thought she'd be old enough to understand, to help even. Boy, was I wrong. One evening, as I was heading to Mom's room, I saw Sarah dart past, her hand clamped firmly over her nose. "Sarah," I called out. "Where are you going? Don't you want to say hi to Grandma?" She shook her head violently. "No way. It smells gross in there." I was shocked. "Sarah, that's not a nice thing to say. Grandma needs our help and support right now." "I don't care," she spat back. "She's disgusting. I'm not going near her." Before I could respond, she stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, stunned and hurt. Where had my sweet little girl gone? I turned to John for support, but found none. "Not my problem," he'd say whenever I asked for help with Mom. I didn't sign up for this. It stung, but I couldn't entirely blame him. He hadn't signed up for this. None of us had. Still, I couldn't help but feel resentful as I watched him play video games with Sarah or take her out for ice cream while I was elbow-deep in adult diapers and medication schedules. The one silver lining was seeing how close John and Sarah had become. They'd always had a good relationship, but now it seemed stronger than ever. I'd hear them laughing together in the living room or see them huddled over Sarah's homework at the kitchen table. It warmed my heart, even as it made me feel more isolated. 2 years flew by in a blur of bedpans, medications, and stolen moments of sleep. Mom's condition had stabilized, but she still needed constant care. I was exhausted, but I'd found a rhythm. Then, one ordinary Tuesday, everything fell apart. The phone rang while I was changing Mom's sheets. It was Mrs. Peterson, our old neighbor from the apartment complex. "Kelly, dear," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern, "I thought you should know. I've been seeing John around quite a bit, with company of young women. Different ones. Always very pretty." I thanked her and hung up, my mind reeling. That night, I confronted John. "Oh, those are just potential tenants," he said smoothly. "I'm showing them the apartment." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But doubt had taken root, and it grew like a weed. A week later, I found the lipstick stain. It was on the collar of his white shirt, a perfect crimson kiss. My hand shook as I held it up to the light, trying to convince myself it was just a pen mark or a food stain. But I knew better. I waited until his next business trip to make my move. With trembling hands, I unlocked the door to our old apartment. The sounds coming from the bedroom confirmed my worst fears before I even opened the door. There was John, in our bed, with a woman I'd never seen before. They scrambled to cover themselves, but the damage was done. "Kelly," John exclaimed, not even having the decency to look ashamed. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at the scene before me, feeling my world crumble around me. "Look," John said, his voice cold, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. But let's be honest, Kelly. I'm bored. You're always busy with your mother. This is exciting." His words cut deeper than any knife. Without a word, I turned and left, my mind already racing towards what I needed to do next. The divorce proceedings were ugly. John fought me every step of the way, but in the end, we stood before a judge, dividing up our life together like it was nothing more than assets on a balance sheet. Then came the hardest part, custody of Sarah. At 12, she was old enough to have a say, and her choice broke my heart. "I want to live with Dad," she declared, her voice steady. "I don't want to be around Grandma anymore. It's gross and depressing. And Mom's always trying to make me help." The judge nodded sympathetically. He took into account John's higher income, the stability he could provide, and Sarah's clear preference. In the end, John was awarded primary custody. I was devastated, but I tried to focus on what was best for Sarah. John could give her opportunities one couldn't: private school, dance lessons, summer camps. We agreed on weekends and holidays for me, a schedule that looked so neat and tidy on paper, but felt like a gaping wound in my heart. As I watched Sarah pack up her things, chatting excitedly about her new room at Dad's new place, I felt like I was losing everything. My marriage was over, my daughter was leaving, and I was left with a house that felt more like a hospital than a home. The first few months after the divorce were tough, but I clung to my weekends with Sarah like a lifeline. We'd go to the movies, have ice cream in the park, or just hang out at home. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Then, slowly, things began to change. Sarah started canceling plans. "I have a sleepover," she'd say. Or, "Dad's taking me to a concert." I tried to be understanding, to be the cool mom who didn't make a fuss. But each cancellation felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Soon, the cancellations became more frequent. Weeks would go by without a visit. My calls went straight to voicemail. Text messages were met with one-word responses, if I got any response at all. One Sunday, after yet another canceled visit, I decided to call Sarah directly. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. I tried again. This time, a robotic voice informed me that the number I was trying to reach had blocked my calls. My hand shook as I dialed John's number. "What do you want, Kelly?" His voice was cold, annoyed. "John, I can't reach Sarah. She's blocked my number." "What's going on?" There was a long pause. Then, "Look, Kelly, Sarah doesn't want to talk to you right now. You need to respect that." "Respect that? She's my daughter. She's also a person with her own feelings," John shot back. "And right now, she doesn't want to be around all that negativity at your place. I mean the sickness, the sadness. Sarah needs stability. She needs a normal family. Sarah sees Lisa as a mother figure now. She has a normal family life here. 2 parents, no sick relatives, no drama. Why can't you just let her be happy?" I couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down my face, and I was glad John couldn't see me. "Look," he continued, his voice softening slightly, "I know this is hard. But if Sarah doesn't want to see you right now, you need to respect that. Don't force it. It'll only push her away more." I wanted to scream, to argue, to demand my rights as a mother. But a small, rational part of my brain whispered that he might be right. If I pushed too hard, I might lose Sarah forever. I sank to the floor, phone clutched to my chest, and sobbed. My little girl, my Sarah, didn't want me anymore. Someone else was being her mother, kissing her goodnight, helping with homework, sharing all the moments I was missing. Mom found me there hours later, still on the floor. She'd managed to shuffle over with her walker, her face creased with concern. "Kelly," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I looked up at her, this woman who'd been my rock for so long, who I'd been taking care of for years. In that moment, our roles reversed again. I was the child, seeking comfort from my mother. "Oh, Mom," I cried, reaching for her hand. "I've lost her. I've lost my baby girl." Mom squeezed my hand, her touch still weak but full of love. "No, Kelly. You haven't lost her. She's just lost right now. She'll find her way back to you. You'll see." 14 years. It's amazing how time can fly by and drag on simultaneously. Mom's condition improved slightly over the years, she regained some mobility and speech, but caring for her remained a full-time job. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep, I felt a mixture of grief and, shamefully, relief. Suddenly, I found myself alone in this big, empty house. The silence was deafening. No more beeping medical equipment, no more schedules of medications and therapy sessions. Just me, rattling around in rooms full of memories. Then, out of the blue, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice. I'd know it anywhere, even after all these years. Mom? It's Sarah. I was hoping we could meet to talk. We arranged to meet at a cafe downtown. As I waited, my hands shaking around my coffee cup, I spotted a young woman entering. It took me a moment to realize it was Sarah. Gone was the gangly preteen I remembered. In her place stood a poised, beautiful young woman. "Hi, Mom," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. We made awkward small talk at first. She filled me in on her life, her job in marketing, her hobbies, her friends. Then she dropped the bombshell. "I'm getting married," she said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "Here's an invitation." My heart swelled with joy and a tinge of sadness. My little girl, getting married. And I'd missed so much. "Oh, Sarah, that's wonderful news. I'm so happy for you. Listen, if you need any help with the expenses." She cut me off abruptly. "Actually, Mom, that's kind of why I wanted to meet. I was hoping to talk about Grandma's inheritance. The house, her savings. I want them." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" "Look, Mom," she said, leaning forward. "That house is in a great area. It's worth a fortune. After the wedding, Jake and I want to live there. Start our family there." Anger bubbled up inside me. "Sarah, you haven't set foot in that house in over a decade. You said it disgusted you. You called it a tomb." She waved her hand dismissively. "I was a kid then. I've grown up. Times have changed. And let's face it, I'm Grandma's only grandchild. She would have wanted me to have it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Wanted you to have it? Sarah, you didn't even come to her funeral. You didn't call, didn't write for years." "That's ancient history," she snapped. "The point is, that house should be mine. I deserve a comfortable life." "Deserve?" I was practically shaking with rage now. "You didn't lift a finger to help when Grandma was sick. I gave up my life to care for her. And now you think you deserve her house?" Sarah's face hardened. "Fine. If that's how you want to play it, I'll sue. I'll get what's rightfully mine." She stood up abruptly, snatching the wedding invitation from the table. "You know what? Forget it. You're not invited to the wedding. I don't need your negativity there. And I don't need your permission to take what's mine." As she stormed out of the cafe, I sat there, stunned. The daughter I'd loved, missed, and longed for all these years was gone. In her place was this stranger, cold and greedy. The days following that disastrous cafe meeting passed in a haze. I alternated between rage, grief, and a numbing emptiness. But as the dust settled, I realized something surprising. I felt relieved. The weight of hoping for reconciliation, of longing for a relationship with Sarah, had lifted. In its place was a strange sort of peace. I didn't attend Sarah's wedding. I didn't send a gift or a card. Instead, I spent that day volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding comfort in the unconditional love of abandoned pets who needed care. It felt fitting somehow. Curiosity got the better of me a few days later, and I found myself scrolling through Sarah's social media. There she was, radiant in white, smiling up at her new husband. For a moment, my heart clenched with the pain of what might have been. But then I saw it, a long, rambling post about her cruel mother who refused to attend her wedding, who withheld her rightful inheritance out of spite. I read it twice, marveling at the sheer audacity of her lies. Part of me wanted to comment, to set the record straight. But what would be the point? The people who mattered, the family who had seen me care for Mom all those years, knew the truth. As for everyone else? Well, their opinions of me based on a stranger's social media post were hardly my concern. A week later, my cousin Jeannie called. "Kelly, I thought you should know," she said, her voice a mix of anger and concern. "Sarah's been talking about suing you for your mom's estate." I sighed, unsurprised. Let her try. That's just it, Jeannie continued. Apparently, she talked to a lawyer. He told her she doesn't have a leg to stand on. Your mom left everything to you, clear as day. I couldn't help but chuckle. Of course Mom had taken care of that. She'd always been the practical one. Thanks for letting me know, Jeannie, I said. But honestly, I don't care what Sarah does anymore. She's made her choices. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, I'm proud of you, Kelly. After everything you've been through, you deserve some peace. As I hung up the phone, I looked around the house, Mom's house, now my house. Every corner held memories, some painful, some beautiful. But for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe here. I walked to the window, looking out at the garden Mom had loved so much. It had gotten a bit overgrown in recent years, but I could see its potential. Maybe it was time to bring some life back to it. As I stood there, planning my next trip to the garden center, I realized something. The chapter of my life revolving around Sarah, the hope, the pain, the longing, was finally closing. But that didn't mean my story was over. Far from it. The garden was in full bloom when the call came. I'd spent the past few months throwing myself into its restoration, finding solace in the simple act of nurturing life. The roses Mom had loved so much were just starting to open, their scent filling the air as I pruned the bushes. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. Hello? Mom? Sarah's voice, thick with tears. Mom, I need your help. I froze, pruning shears still in hand. Sarah, what's wrong? I'm pregnant, she sobbed. And we're struggling. Mom, I need money. You have to help me. You can't leave your grandchild without anything. I listened silently as she rambled on, her words becoming more frantic, more accusatory. You abandoned me, Mom. You never tried to contact me, never fought for me. And now you're going to abandon your grandchild too? Something inside me snapped. Not with anger, but with a calm, unshakable resolve. Sarah, I said, my voice steady. That's enough. She fell silent, probably shocked that I'd interrupted her tirade. I never abandoned you. I sent child support every month without fail. I called, I texted, I emailed. You blocked my number. You chose your stepmother. You made your decisions, and I respected them, even when they broke my heart. But Mom. No, Sarah, I'm not finished. You're an adult now, about to be a parent yourself. It's time you took responsibility for your choices and your life. I'm not your bank. I'm not your safety net. And I'm not going to be manipulated by lies and guilt trips. I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. If you need help, go to your father and stepmother. They're your real family, remember? The ones you chose. I've made my peace with that. Now you need to make peace with the consequences of your choices. You can't do this, Sarah cried. I'm your daughter. Yes, you are, I said, my voice softening slightly. And I'll always love the little girl you were. But I don't know the woman you'd become. And I don't think I want to. I took a deep breath. Goodbye, Sarah. I wish you and your child well. But please, don't contact me again. I ended the call before she could respond, my hand shaking slightly as I lowered the phone. For a moment, I stood there in the garden, surrounded by the blooming life I'd nurtured, feeling the weight of what had just happened. Then, slowly, I felt it lift. The last ties binding me to a painful past had been cut. The last what-ifs laid to rest. I looked around at the garden, at the house beyond. This was my life now. Not defined by loss or regret, but by the choices I made going forward. I picked up my pruning shears and turned back to the rosebush. There was still work to be done, still beauty to cultivate. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt truly, completely free. I'm Cameron, and I grew up in the shadow of a star. That star was my older sister, Lily. Our house was always filled with people, aunts, uncles, cousins, you name it. They'd pour into our backyard like ants to a picnic, drawn by the promise of my mom's famous barbecue and the chance to see Lily perform. Our backyard was like a stage, with its neatly trimmed lawn and the big oak tree that provided the perfect backdrop. Dad would fire up the grill, the smell of charcoal and sizzling meat filling the air, while Mom bustled around, making sure everyone had a drink in hand. "Lily, sweetie," Aunt Marge would call out, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Why don't you give us a little song?" And just like that, all eyes would turn to my sister. Lily would hop onto a chair, her golden curls bouncing, a mischievous glint in her eye. She'd clear her throat dramatically, and then, magic. "My heart will go on and on," she'd warble, doing her best Celine Dion impression. The adults would go wild, clapping and cheering like they were at a real concert. Mom and Dad would beam with pride, Dad often wiping a tear from his eye. Meanwhile, I'd be off to the side, trying to blend in with the bushes. It's not that I didn't want to join in, but every time I opened my mouth to sing, it sounded like a cat being strangled. And poetry? Forget about it. The words would tangle on my tongue, leaving me red-faced and stammering. I've heard my relatives whisper that I'm so unlike my sister. It wasn't just the relatives. Mom and Dad made it clear who the star of the family was. While Lily got shuttled from dance classes to singing lessons to art workshops, I was left to my own devices. Not that I minded much. I found solace in the dusty old books that lined our shelves. The only person who seemed to get me was Great Aunt Maggie. She'd find me hiding behind the garage or up in the treehouse, nose buried in a book. "What adventure are you on today, Cameron?" she'd ask, settling down beside me. I'd look up, grateful for the interruption. "Oh, just reading about ancient Egypt," I'd say, showing her the cover of my latest find. Maggie would nod, her eyes twinkling. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, girl. Don't let anyone tell you different." Those moments with Maggie were like a balm to my soul. She didn't expect me to perform or be anyone other than who I was. With her, I could just be Cameron, the quiet, bookish girl who preferred the company of paper and ink to the chaos of family gatherings. But as much as I cherished those moments, they couldn't erase the sting of being the forgotten child. Every time Lily mastered a new song or won another award, my parents would shower her with praise and gifts. New clothes, the latest gadgets, you name it, Lily got it. And me? I got hand-me-downs and sighs of exasperation. School became my sanctuary. While I wasn't exactly Miss Popularity, I found my groove in the classroom. I wasn't content to just sit there and let the lessons wash over me. No, I was determined to understand every single thing the teachers said. "Mrs. Thompson," I'd say after class, my voice quiet but steady, "could you explain that bit about mitosis again? I didn't quite get it." She'd smile, obviously pleased by my interest. "Of course, Cameron. Why don't we go over it together?" If a teacher couldn't spare the time, I'd ask for book recommendations. Soon, my backpack was always bulging with extra reading material. I'd stay up late, poring over those books, determined to master every subject. All that hard work paid off. By the time I hit high school, I was top of my class. For once in my life, I was the best at something. I even made a few friends, other bookworms, who didn't mind my quiet ways. As graduation approached, our house became Lily Central. Mom was constantly helping her put together her portfolio for the advertising and PR program at some fancy college. "Oh, honey, this campaign idea is perfect," Mom would gush, looking at Lily's work. "You're so talented." I'd roll my eyes and retreat to my room, burying myself in my studies. But one night, during yet another family dinner devoted to Lily's college plans, something in me snapped. "I'm going to college too," I blurted out. "I want to study management." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, to my shock and hurt, they all burst out laughing. Oh, sweetie, Mom said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. We don't have money for that. You'll need to get a job after graduation. You're just not as gifted as your sister. I felt like I'd been slapped. But I'm the top student in my class, I stammered, my face burning with anger and embarrassment. I get straight A's. I stormed up to my room and came back with my report card, slamming it on the table. They all leaned in to look, their eyes widening in surprise. Well, I'll be damned, Dad muttered, scratching his head. When did this happen? It's been happening for years, I spat. Not that any of you ever noticed. Mom at least had the decency to look ashamed. Cameron, we had no idea. But Dad cut her off. Look, it doesn't change anything. We've spent all our savings on Lily's education. There's nothing left for you, Cameron. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. You'll go to work at my cousin Frank's restaurant after graduation. I turned and ran, ignoring their calls. I sprinted up the stairs, into my room, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. As I collapsed onto my bed, sobs racking my body, I felt something inside me harden. Fine, I thought, my hands clenching into fists. If they won't help me, I'll find another way. I'll show them all what Cameron can do. The next few months were a blur. Lily headed off to college, her departure marked by tearful goodbyes and proud parental embraces. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor, determined to graduate at the top of my class. During this time, I found myself spending more and more time with Great Aunt Maggie. Her small, cozy house became my refuge from the tension at home. One afternoon, as we sat in her sunlit kitchen sipping tea, she asked the question I'd been dreading. So, Cameron, she said, her kind eyes fixed on me, what are your plans after graduation? I stared into my teacup, fighting back tears. I don't know, Aunt Maggie. Mom and Dad won't help me with college. They say there's no money left after paying for Lily's education. Maggie was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Cameron, dear, I've got some savings, I'd like to give them to you. For college. You're smart as a whip, and I'll be damned if I let that brain of yours go to waste. The reality of her words hit me like a tidal wave. I burst into tears, overwhelmed by her generosity and the sudden realization that my dreams weren't dead after all. Thank you, I sobbed, throwing my arms around her. Thank you so much, Aunt Maggie. The months flew by, and before I knew it, I was walking across the stage at graduation, diploma in hand. As I scanned the crowd, I saw Aunt Maggie beaming at me. My parents were there too, looking proud but uncomfortable. That evening, as I pored over college brochures, Mom walked in. Cameron, honey, she said, her voice syrupy sweet, your father's cousin Frank called. He's got a waitressing job for you at his restaurant. Isn't that exciting? I took a deep breath. Actually, Mom, I won't be needing that job. I'm going to college. Dad appeared in the doorway, frowning. And how exactly do you plan to pay for that? Aunt Maggie is helping me, I said, my chin held high. She's giving me her savings for tuition. The shocked silence that followed was almost comical. Then, to my disbelief, Dad's face turned red with anger. Absolutely not, he bellowed. If Maggie's got money to spare, it should go to Lily. She needs a car for her job in advertising after she graduates next year. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you serious? I spat. This is my chance to get an education, to make something of myself. Don't be selfish, Cameron, Mom chimed in. Your sister needs that money more than you do. No, I said, my voice shaking but firm. This is my money now, and I'm using it for college. End of discussion. From that moment on, life at home became unbearable. My parents either ignored me completely or snapped at me over the smallest things. The tension was suffocating. After a particularly nasty argument, I called Aunt Maggie in tears and told her everything. Pack your bags, sweetheart, she said without hesitation. You're moving in with me. The next day, I stuffed everything I owned into a cab and drove away, watching my childhood home shrink in the rearview mirror. As I pulled up to Aunt Maggie's house, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The summer flew by in a whirlwind of preparation, and before I knew it, I was stepping onto the campus of State University. Thanks to my stellar grades and Aunt Maggie's generosity, I'd gotten into the management program I'd always dreamed of. My first day of classes, I felt like I was floating on air. As I sat in my introduction to business lecture, drinking in every word, I couldn't help but think, I made it. I'm really here. Meanwhile, Lily was starting her senior year at her fancy college. I hadn't heard much from her or my parents since I'd moved out, but I tried not to let it bother me. I was too busy reveling in my newfound freedom and the excitement of college life. But then, about a month into the semester, Aunt Maggie called me. "Cameron, dear," she said, her voice hesitant, "I think you should sit down for this." My heart raced as she filled me in on the family drama I'd missed. Apparently, Lily had shown up at home out of the blue, announcing she'd dropped out of college. The reason? She was pregnant. According to Aunt Maggie, Lily had been flippant about the whole thing. "Oh, don't worry," she'd said, tossing her hair. "The baby's father is loaded. We'll be getting married soon." But the story didn't end there. It turned out Lily's boyfriend wasn't as committed as she'd thought. When he found out she'd been sleeping with his friend too, all hell broke loose. "Now they don't even know who the father is," Aunt Maggie sighed. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process it all. Part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, the golden child had fallen from her pedestal. But mostly, I just felt sad for Lily and the mess she'd gotten herself into. The saga continued over the next few months. Aunt Maggie kept me updated on all the gossip from the family gatherings I no longer attended. When Lily's baby was born, a DNA test confirmed her boyfriend was indeed the father. But instead of the fairy tale wedding Lily had envisioned, he simply agreed to pay child support. The final blow came when Lily, desperate for work, took a job as a waitress at Uncle Frank's restaurant, the very job my parents had tried to foist on me. As I hung up the phone, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. There was a small, petty part of me that wanted to gloat, to rub my success in my family's faces. But mostly, I just felt a profound sense of gratitude for where I was and how far I'd come. For years flew by in a blur of lectures, exams, and late-night study sessions. Before I knew it, I was walking across the stage at graduation, my hard-earned management degree clutched tightly in my hand. As I scanned the crowd, I saw Aunt Maggie beaming at me, tears of pride in her eyes. Thanks to my top grades and glowing recommendations from my professors, I landed a job as a manager at the Gilded Fork, one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city. The salary was more than I'd ever dreamed of, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly successful. With my first paycheck, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I marched into the electronics store and bought the latest smartphone for Aunt Maggie. Her face lit up when I presented it to her. "Oh, Cameron," she gasped, turning the sleek device over in her hands. "This is too much." I grinned, already pulling out my own phone. "Not at all. Now, let me show you how to use it." Over the next few weeks, I taught Aunt Maggie the ins and outs of social media. She took to it like a duck to water, especially loving Facebook's video feature. Soon, her page was filled with clips of her garden, her cat, and her infamous apple pie in various stages of creation. I'd watch her videos during my lunch breaks, always making sure to leave a comment or a like. It was our way of staying connected, even when work kept me busy. One day, as I was preparing for the dinner rush, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, surprised to see my mother's name on the screen. We hadn't spoken in years. "Cameron?" Her voice was hesitant. We were hoping you might come over to talk." After a long pause, I agreed. That Sunday, I found myself standing on the porch of my childhood home, my hand hovering over the doorbell. Before I could press it, the door swung open. "Cameron!" My mother pulled me into a tight hug. "Oh, sweetie, it's so good to see you." Inside, I found my father, Lily, and a toddler I assumed was my niece. The atmosphere was tense, but not hostile like I'd feared. "You look good, kiddo," Dad said, his voice gruff but warm. "We hear you're doing well for yourself." I nodded, still wary. "I am. I'm a manager at the Gilded Fork now." Their eyes widened at the name of the restaurant. Mom cleared her throat. That's wonderful, dear. Actually, that's part of why we wanted to talk to you." Over the next hour, they apologized for how they'd treated me, admitting they'd been wrong to dismiss my potential. Then came the real reason for the reunion. "Cameron," Mom said, glancing at Lily, we were wondering if you might be able to help Lily get a job at your restaurant?" I looked at my sister, bouncing her daughter on her knee. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'll see what I can do," I said finally. "No promises, but I'll ask." True to my word, I spoke to Mr. Reeves, the restaurant owner, about Lily. To my surprise, he agreed to give her a shot as an administrator. Lily started the following week. I watched her closely, half expecting her to fail or cause drama. But to my shock, she excelled. She was punctual, efficient, and the customers loved her charm. As the weeks passed, I found myself relaxing around her. We weren't best friends by any means, but we developed a cordial working relationship. Just when I thought I had everything figured out, the universe decided to throw me another curveball, this time a positive one. Mr. Reeves called me into his office one day. My heart raced, wondering if I'd done something wrong. Instead, he grinned at me and said, "Cameron, how would you like to help me expand the business?" Before I knew it, I was overseeing the opening of not one, but 3 new restaurants. My days became a whirlwind of staff meetings, menu tastings, and number crunching. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and everything I'd ever dreamed of. The promotion came with a significant pay bump, and suddenly, I found myself with more money than I knew what to do with. That's when the calls from my parents started. At first, it was just small things. "The roof is leaking," Mom would say, her voice hesitant. "We were wondering if you might be able to help out a little." I was surprised at how good it felt to say yes, to be able to solve their problems with a simple transfer of funds. It started with the roof, then it was a new water heater, and before long, I was funding a complete home renovation. As their financial situation improved, thanks to my monthly allowance, the infamous family party started up again. But this time, when I attended, things were different. "Have you heard about Cameron's latest project?" Mom would gush to the relatives. "She's opening a new restaurant downtown. We're so proud of her." I'd catch Lily's eye across the room, and she'd give me a small smile. She was doing well too, having been promoted to head administrator at the Gilded Fork. "My girls," Dad would say, an arm around each of us. Both of them making their old man proud. Part of me wanted to be bitter, to remind them of how they'd treated me before. But a larger part reveled in the warmth of their approval, something I'd craved for so long. As I drove home that night, I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. Finally, after all these years, I had what I'd always wanted, success in my career and the love and appreciation of my family. I was the golden child now, but better than that, I was my own woman, standing on my own 2 feet. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon when my world came crashing down around me. I was scrolling through Facebook, sipping my coffee, when I saw that Aunt Maggie had posted a new video. It was from one of the family gatherings I'd missed due to work commitments. Smiling, I clicked play, expecting to see the usual scenes of laughter and merriment. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. There, in living color, were my parents, their faces flushed with alcohol and self-righteousness. Mom was gesticulating wildly, her voice slurred but unmistakable. And Cameron, that ungrateful little freeloader, she was saying, "She barely gives us anything. We're not made of money, you know." Dad chimed in, his face red. "That's right. We're doing just fine, thanks to our Lily. She's the one keeping that fancy restaurant afloat. Cameron just rides on her coattails." The video continued, with various relatives nodding along, some even adding their own criticisms. Lily sat in the corner, looking uncomfortable but not contradicting them. As the video ended, I sat there, stunned. How could they? After everything I'd done for them, all the money I'd given them, how could they turn around and say such awful, untrue things? With shaking hands, I scrolled down to the comments. There, I saw a stream of messages from my parents. Maggie, delete this video right now. You had no right to post this. Take it down immediately. But Aunt Maggie's response made me burst into tears. I don't know how to delete videos, and even if I did, I wouldn't. It's time everyone saw the truth about how you treat Cameron. She's the one supporting you, and this is how you repay her kindness? Shame on you both. I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying the video, reading and rereading the comments. The betrayal cut deep, reopening wounds I thought had long since healed. Finally, I picked up my phone and dialed Aunt Maggie's number. "Oh, Cameron, dear," she said when she answered, her voice full of sympathy. "I take it you've seen the video?" "Yeah," I croaked, my voice raw from crying. "I can't believe it, Aunt Maggie. How could they?" I could hear the anger in her voice as she replied, "They've always been like this, Cameron. You just haven't been around to see it. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but maybe it's for the best. You deserve to know the truth." We talked for hours, Aunt Maggie comforting me as I cycled through shock, anger, and grief. As night fell, I made a decision. "I'm cutting them off," I told Aunt Maggie, my voice firm despite the pain in my heart. "No more money, no more help. They made their bed, now they can lie in it." The days following the video revelation were some of the hardest of my life. My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from my parents, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Their words, so cruel and untrue, played on a loop in my mind. Finally, after a week of silence, I sent them a brief, cold text. "I've seen the video. I know what you really think of me. Don't contact me again. The money stops now." Their responses came flooding in immediately. At first, they were apologetic. "Cameron, sweetie, we're so sorry. We didn't mean any of it. Please forgive us." But as the days passed and I maintained my silence, their tune changed. "We're your parents. You owe us." Each message twisted the knife deeper, but I stood firm. I'd given them chance after chance, and they'd thrown it all back in my face. It was time to break the cycle. Lily, surprisingly, stayed out of it. At work, she was the model employee, efficient and professional. If she harbored any resentment over the loss of our parents' financial support, she didn't show it. Our interactions remained cordial but distant. "I'm not taking sides," she told me one day after a staff meeting. "It's between you and them." I nodded, appreciating her neutrality even if part of me wished she'd stand up for me. But I understood. She had her own child to think about now. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself leaning heavily on Aunt Maggie. Our Sunday video calls became the highlight of my week. She'd regale me with stories from her garden or her latest baking adventure, providing a much-needed dose of normalcy in the chaos my life had become. "You're doing the right thing, Cameron," she'd assure me when doubts crept in. "Don't let them manipulate you anymore." To my surprise, other relatives began reaching out too. Cousin Sarah, who'd always been kind to me at family gatherings, sent me a heartfelt email. "I saw the video. I want you to know I think you're amazing, Cameron. What you've achieved, how you've helped everyone, you're an inspiration. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Uncle Bob, Dad's brother, called me out of the blue. Kid, I've watched you grow up and become this incredible woman. Your parents are fools if they can't see how special you are. You've got family in your corner, remember that." These messages of support were like balm to my wounded heart. I realized that while I might have lost my parents, I'd gained a family who appreciated me for who I truly was. As the year drew to a close, Mr. Reeves called me into his office. I went in nervous, wondering if the family drama had somehow affected my work performance. Instead, he smiled broadly and said, "Cameron, I'm retiring next year. I want you to take over as CEO of the restaurant group." I stood there, shocked into silence. Finally, I managed to stammer out, Are you sure?" He nodded, his eyes twinkling. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You've earned this, Cameron. You're the reason this business has flourished. It's time you took the reins." As I left his office, my head spinning with possibilities, I realized something profound. The little girl who'd been overlooked and underestimated had grown into a woman who'd surpassed everyone's expectations, including her own. I guess I should start at the beginning. I'm Camilla, and I was born to Jack and Lisa, my parents. Dad was always busy with his business stuff, and Mom was a teacher at the local elementary school. For the first 9 years of my life, things were pretty normal. We lived in a cozy house in the suburbs, had family dinners, went on vacations, you know, the usual stuff. Dad was always working on some new business idea. He'd come home late, his head full of plans and dreams. Mom was the calm one, always there with a hug or a kind word. She'd help me with my homework, bake cookies with me on weekends, and tell me stories before bed. But then, when I was 9, everything fell apart. It was a regular Tuesday evening. I was in my room, playing with my dolls, when I heard shouting from downstairs. It wasn't the normal kind of arguing, this was different, scary. I crept down the stairs, my heart pounding. I saw Mom and Dad in the living room. Dad's face was red, and he was waving his arms around. Mom was crying, mascara running down her cheeks. "How could you, Lisa?" Dad yelled. "With Mark? My God, he's been to our house for dinner." Mom was sobbing now. "I'm sorry, Jack, it just happened. I didn't mean for it to." "Didn't mean for it to what? To destroy our family?" Dad's voice cracked. The next few weeks were a blur. There were hushed phone calls, meetings with people in suits, and a lot of crying, from both Mom and Dad. I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I knew it was bad. Then came the day Dad told me we were leaving. He knelt down in front of me, his eyes tired and sad. "Camilla, honey, you and I are going to be living somewhere else. We're leaving the house for your mom." "Why can't we stay here with Mom?" I asked, my lower lip trembling. Dad looked around the living room, his gaze lingering on the family photos. "It's complicated, sweetie. But we both love you very much. That will never change." As Dad and I drove away from our house, my stuffed animals and favorite books piled in the back seat, I felt like my whole world was crumbling. I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of a long, painful journey. Life with Dad turned out to be way different than I expected. At first, I thought we'd be struggling, you know? But Dad's business suddenly took off. Before I knew it, we were moving into this huge house, even bigger than our old one. It was weird, living somewhere so fancy when I still felt so messed up inside. Dad was working all the time. He'd leave before I woke up and come home after I was in bed. A lot of days, I'd end up at Grandma and Grandpa's house, that's Robert and Eleanor, Dad's parents. "Camilla, honey, come help me with these cookies," Grandma would say, trying to keep me busy. Grandpa would take me out to the garden, teaching me the names of all the plants. They were nice and all, but it wasn't the same as having my parents around. When Dad was home, he was different. Stricter, I guess. "Camilla, have you done your homework?" he'd ask as soon as he walked in the door. Or, "Camilla, your room's a mess. Clean it up before dinner." It was like he was trying to be both Mom and Dad, and not really managing either. But I gotta give it to him, he was trying. Every Sunday became what he called Daddy-Daughter Day. We'd go out and do stuff together, just the two of us. Mini golf was his favorite, he'd get so into it, acting all goofy and competitive. "Watch out, Camilla. I'm going for a hole-in-one," he'd shout, making me laugh despite myself. Sometimes we'd go get ice cream. I'd always get the triple chocolate fudge, and he'd pretend to be grossed out. "How can you eat that sugar bomb?" he'd ask, while secretly stealing spoonfuls when he thought I wasn't looking. Other times, we'd hit up the local museum. Dad would read every single plaque out loud, putting on different voices for each one. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, he'd say in this ridiculous pirate voice, making me giggle and the other visitors stare. When I turned 10, Dad signed me up for piano lessons. I wasn't too thrilled about it at first, but it turned out to be pretty cool. Dad would come to every recital, sitting in the front row with this big, goofy grin on his face. Even when I messed up, which was a lot, he'd be the first one on his feet, clapping like I'd just won a Grammy or something. But even with all that good stuff, I couldn't help missing Mom. Some nights, when Dad was working late, I'd pull out our old family photo albums. There was Mom, smiling in every picture. I'd trace her face with my finger, trying to remember what her laugh sounded like, or the smell of her perfume. Once a month, like clockwork, I'd get to see Mom. These court-ordered visits became the highlight of my calendar, circled in red and counted down to with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The first time I saw her after the split, it was awkward as hell. We just stood there, staring at each other like strangers. Then Mom burst into tears and pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. After that, our visits became a whirlwind of activities and indulgence. It was like Mom was trying to cram a month's worth of mothering into a single day. She'd take me shopping, buying me clothes that made me feel grown up and cool. I remember trying on this crop top and thinking I was hot shit. "You look beautiful, sweetie," Mom gushed. When I wore it home, Dad nearly had a heart attack. "Absolutely not," he said, his face turning red. "Go change, now." I stomped up to my room, furious. "Mom lets me wear it," I muttered. "Well, I'm not your mother," Dad shot back. The next visit, Mom took me to this fancy cafe. The kind of place with tiny sandwiches and waiters in bow ties. "Order whatever you want, honey," Mom said with a wink. I went nuts. Chocolate cake, ice cream sundae, 3 different kinds of soda. By the end, I was so hyped up on sugar I was practically vibrating. Dad wasn't thrilled when I came home bouncing off the walls. "What did she feed you?" he grumbled, watching me zoom around the living room. But the best visit was when Mom surprised me with a trip to Adventureland, the local amusement park. We rode every roller coaster twice, screaming our heads off and laughing until our sides hurt. As we sat on a bench, sharing a massive cotton candy, Mom got this faraway look in her eyes. "Remember when we used to have family picnics in the backyard?" she said softly. "Your dad would burn the burgers, and we'd end up eating ice cream for dinner." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Those memories seemed like they belonged to someone else now. Mom squeezed my hand. "I miss those days, Camilla. I miss you. Maybe someday we could be a family again." My heart leapt at her words. "Really?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "We'll see, sweetie. We'll see." For weeks after, I'd daydream about moving back in with Mom, about our family being whole again. But then I'd look at Dad, see him trying so hard to make pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, and feel guilty for even thinking about leaving. Just before my 12th birthday, Mom dropped a bombshell. She was getting married to Mark. Yeah, that Mark, with whom she'd had an affair with. The wedding was like something out of a fairy tale. Mom looked stunning in her white gown, and Mark, well, he looked happy. I stood there in my frilly bridesmaid dress, watching them exchange vows, and felt torn in two. Part of me was happy for Mom. She was glowing, laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years. But another part of me couldn't help thinking about Dad, alone in our big empty house, probably buried in work or binge-watching some crappy TV show. After Mom and Mark's wedding, things started to change. Our visits took on a new flavor. Mark was always there now, hovering in the background like an eager puppy. He'd ruffle my hair and say stuff like, "I always dreamed of having a daughter just like you, Camilla." It was nice, I guess. Weird, but nice. And the way Mom would beam at him when he said it, like he'd just handed her the moon or something, well, that made me feel good too. Like maybe this whole messed up situation could work out after all. Mom started talking more and more about me living with them. She'd go on and on about this room they were planning for me. "It'll have a window seat, Camilla," she'd say, her eyes sparkling. "Just like you always wanted. And we can paint it any color you like." I'd nod and smile, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. It felt like betraying Dad to even think about it. Our shopping sprees became less frequent. Instead, we'd have these big family dinners at their place. Mark would cook, he wasn't half bad, actually, and then regale us with stories about his work. Mom would hang on his every word, and I'd sit there, pushing food around my plate, feeling like a third wheel in my own family. When I turned 14, everything kicked into high gear. Mom started calling me every week, sometimes more. She'd show up at my school events unannounced, bringing me flowers or taking me out for ice cream after. "You know, Camilla," she'd say, stirring her coffee, "you're old enough now to decide where you want to live. The courts would listen to you." I'd freeze up every time she brought it up. Part of me wanted to jump at the chance, to go back to the way things were before. But another part wasn't so sure anymore. One day, she showed up at my debate club meeting. I was in the middle of arguing about climate change when I saw her slip into the back of the room. After it was over, she rushed up to me, beaming. "Oh, Camilla, you were wonderful," she gushed. "You know, if you lived with us, you could join the debate team at your new school. They're state champions." I felt my stomach clench. "Mom, just think about it, okay," she said, squeezing my arm. "We want you home with us." As I watched her leave, I felt torn in two. Home. What did that even mean anymore? That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought about Mom and her new perfect life with Mark. I thought about Dad, working himself to the bone to give me everything I needed. I was 14 years old, and the weight of the world felt like it was on my shoulders. How was I supposed to choose? How could I possibly make a decision that wouldn't hurt someone I loved? My 15th birthday was coming up, and instead of being excited, I was dreading it. Mom and Dad were at each other's throats about who would host my party. It all came to a head at this family dinner at Dad's place. "She's been living with me for years, Lisa," Dad growled, stabbing his fork into his steak. "Of course I'm hosting her party." Mom's eyes flashed. "She's my daughter too, Jack. I have a right to celebrate her birthday." I just sat there, pushing my peas around my plate, wishing I could disappear. Then Mom dropped the bomb. "Camilla," she said, her voice suddenly soft, "you're old enough now to decide where you want to live. Who do you choose?" The room went dead silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, Mom's hopeful, Dad's hurt, Mark's expectant. My throat closed up. I couldn't breathe. "I want to live with Mom," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The look on Dad's face. God, I'll never forget it. It was like I'd reached into his chest and ripped out his heart. He just crumpled. Before I knew it, I was packing my bags. Mom and Mark were over the moon, helping me move my stuff into their place. Dad just stood in the doorway, watching, his eyes hollow. "You can come back anytime, Pumpkin," he said as I left. Anytime. The first few weeks at Mom and Mark's were like a dream. They took me shopping for my new room, letting me pick out this super expensive, trendy bedroom set. They enrolled me in this fancy private school, Westfield Academy. "You'll get a top-notch education here," Mom gushed. "This is the start of a bright future, Camilla." And the family game nights? They were a blast. We'd play Monopoly or Catan, laughing and trash-talking each other. For a while, I thought I'd made the right choice. But then, things started to change. It started small. Mom making comments about my clothes or my hair. "Honey, are you sure you want to wear that? It's not very flattering." Or, "Mark's niece always looks so put together. Maybe you could try styling your hair like hers?" Then it was my grades. I was struggling to keep up at Westfield. It was way harder than my old school. A B-, Camilla? Mom frowned, looking at my report card. You know, Mark's niece is top of her class. Maybe you're not applying yourself enough. The game nights became less frequent. More and more often, I'd come home to find a note on the fridge, gone out with the Petersons. Leftovers in the fridge. Don't wait up. I'd heat up my dinner and eat alone in my room, staring at the fancy decor that suddenly felt cold and impersonal. The final straw was the vacation. They'd been promising me this amazing trip to Hawaii for months. I was so excited, counting down the days. Then, 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave, Mark sat me down. "Listen, kiddo," he said, not quite meeting my eyes, "we're going to have to postpone the trip. Just some financial stuff we need to sort out. You understand, right?" I nodded, forcing a smile. But inside, I felt something crack. That night, I lay in my fancy new bed, in my fancy new room, in this house that was supposed to be my home, and I cried. I cried for the life I'd left behind, for the dad who was probably sitting alone in his big empty house, for the little girl who thought she could have it all. The days leading up to the final custody hearing were tense. Mom was all smiles and reassurances, but I could feel the undercurrent of anxiety in the house. It was like walking on eggshells, everyone trying to pretend everything was perfect. I couldn't sleep. The pressure of the upcoming hearing, the growing unease I felt in this house, it all swirled in my head, keeping me awake night after night. It was about a week before the hearing when it happened. I woke up in the middle of the night, my throat dry as sandpaper. Figuring everyone was asleep, I crept downstairs for a glass of water. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Mom and Mark, having what sounded like a heated discussion. I froze, not wanting to interrupt. That's when I heard it. "I'm tired of pretending that I like having her here," Mark's voice, harsh and annoyed. "The kid is constantly draining our resources." My heart stopped. I pressed myself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. I know, Mom replied, her voice low and urgent. "But think about the tax breaks and the alimony. Once we have full custody, we'll have a steady income stream from Jack." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Mom was using me for money? Mark's voice again, skeptical. "I hope it's worth it. I didn't sign up to be a full-time dad to a teenager." "Just a little longer," Mom said, her voice soothing now. "Once she's officially ours, we can start setting some stricter rules. Maybe even send her to boarding school." I didn't wait to hear more. I bolted back upstairs, my need for water forgotten. I dove under my covers, shaking, tears streaming down my face. It had all been a lie. The shopping trips, the fancy school, the family game nights, it was all just a show. They didn't want me. They wanted Dad's money. I barely slept that night, replaying their words over and over in my head. When morning came, I dragged myself downstairs, feeling like a zombie. "Morning, sweetie," Mom chirped, way too cheerful. "Ready for breakfast?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I poked at my cereal, my stomach churning. "Everything okay, Camilla?" Mark asked, peering at me over his newspaper. "You look a little pale." I forced a smile. "Just nervous about a test," I lied. They exchanged a look. "Well, don't stress too much," Mom said, patting my hand. "I'm sure you'll do great." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, to tell them I knew everything, to demand how they could do this to me. But I didn't. I just sat there, nodding and smiling, playing the part of the perfect daughter. As soon as breakfast was over, I retreated to my room. I sat on my bed, staring at the fancy decor that now felt like a prison. What was I going to do? The hearing was in a week. If I didn't say anything, I'd be trapped here, with people who saw me as nothing more than a paycheck. The day of the custody hearing arrived like a thunderclap. The courtroom was packed. Mom and Mark sat on one side, both looking confident and put together. On the other side was Dad, with Grandma and Grandpa right behind him. Dad looked tired, resigned, like he'd already accepted defeat. As the lawyers droned on, presenting their arguments, I sat there in silence, my hands clenched so tight my knuckles were white. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, their expectations pressing down like a physical thing. Finally, the moment came. The judge, a stern-looking woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, turned to me. "Camilla," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle, "you're old enough now that your opinion matters in this decision. Who do you want to live with?" The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I could feel Mom's triumphant smile, could practically taste her victory. Dad just looked broken. Like he was bracing for the final blow. I stood up, my legs shaking so bad I thought I might fall over. I took a deep breath, and then, "I want to live with my father," I said, my voice trembling but growing stronger with each word. "And I don't want to see my mother anymore." The shock in the room was electric. Mom's smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. Mark's face went pale. Dad looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. The judge leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Camilla, that's a very serious statement. Can you tell us why?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "A week ago, I overheard a conversation between my mother and Mark. They said they were only fighting for custody because of the money. The alimony, the tax breaks. They talked about sending me to boarding school once they had custody. They don't really want me." As I spoke, I could see the color draining from Mom's face. Mark couldn't even look at me, his eyes fixed on the floor. "That's not true," Mom burst out, her voice shrill. "Camilla, honey, you must have misunderstood." "Mrs. Parker, please," the judge cut her off sharply. She turned back to me, her eyes kind but probing. "Camilla, are you absolutely sure about what you heard?" I nodded, feeling tears start to well up in my eyes. "Yes, Your Honor, I'm sure." The judge nodded slowly, then turned to address the courtroom. "In light of this new information, we'll need to take a brief recess. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. As everyone started to file out, I finally dared to look at Dad. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and something else. Hope, maybe? I wanted to run to him, to throw my arms around him and beg for forgiveness. But before I could move, a court officer was ushering me out of the room. The next 30 minutes felt like an eternity, but finally, we were called back into the courtroom. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The judge cleared her throat, and the room fell silent. In light of the new information provided by Camilla, and after careful consideration of all factors involved, I've reached a decision. Custody is awarded to the father, Jack Thompson. Furthermore, Lisa Parker will be required to pay child support. The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming. I looked at Dad, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw him smile, really smile. As we left the courthouse, Mom grabbed my arm. Her face was twisted with anger and hurt. "I never loved you anyway," she hissed. "You're just as stupid as your father." Her words stung, but as I watched her storm off with Mark, I realized something. I was free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, the constant feeling of not being good enough. The next few years were, well, they weren't easy, but they were healing. Dad and I started going to family therapy together. At first, it was awkward and painful, dredging up all the hurt and misunderstandings between us. But slowly, session by session, we started to rebuild our relationship. We learned to communicate, to understand each other. Our bond grew stronger than I ever thought possible. Grandma and Grandpa became my rocks. They were always there with a warm hug, a home-cooked meal, or just a listening ear when I needed to talk. Their unwavering support helped me believe in family again. I threw myself into school and extracurriculars. I joined the debate team on a whim and discovered I had a knack for public speaking. Standing at the podium, articulating my thoughts, I felt powerful in a way I never had before. It was like I'd finally found my voice. On my 18th birthday, Dad surprised me with a gift that brought me to tears. It was a scrapbook, filled with photos and mementos from my childhood. There were pictures I thought were lost in the divorce, Mom and Dad and me at the beach, my first day of kindergarten, Christmases, and birthdays and ordinary days that suddenly seemed precious. Now, at 20, I'm in college studying psychology. My experiences inspired me to want to help other kids going through divorce. I want them to know they're not alone, that it's not their fault, that they can survive and even thrive. I still have scars from what happened. There are days when the pain of Mom's betrayal feels fresh, when I wonder how she could have used me like that. But I'm learning to use that pain as fuel, to turn it into something positive. I've started speaking at conferences about children's rights in divorce proceedings. I tell my story, hoping it will make a difference. Maybe if one judge, one lawyer, one parent hears it and thinks twice about using a child as a pawn, it will all be worth it. Dad comes to every one of my speaking engagements. He sits in the front row, beaming with pride. Sometimes I catch him wiping away a tear when I talk about how far we've come. As for Mom, I haven't spoken to her since that day at the courthouse. Sometimes I think about reaching out, but I'm not ready. Maybe someday, but not yet. For now, I'm focused on healing, on building a future, on becoming the person I want to be. Life isn't perfect. I still have trust issues, still struggle with self-doubt sometimes. But I'm learning, growing, healing. And I'm surrounded by people who love me for who I am, not what I can do for them. I'm Elizabeth, but most people call me Liz or Lizzie. Some even call me Betty, though I've never been fond of that one. I grew up in what you'd call an ordinary family, Mom, Dad, and my older sister, Kate. Kate's 7 years older than me, and boy, did that make a difference. From the day I can remember, our house was like a shrine to Kate's existence. Every wall had a picture of her first smile, her first steps, or her scribbled drawings that Mom and Dad treated like Picassos. Me? I was just there. I got used to it, you know? Wearing Kate's hand-me-downs, playing with her old toys. It wasn't great, but I didn't know any different. I just learned to keep quiet and not make a fuss. As the years went by, the pattern continued. Kate got new clothes, I got her old ones. She got the latest toys, I got the ones she'd outgrown. But I never complained. I just existed. High school came and went. Kate had already moved out by then, off to college on a scholarship. I thought maybe now my parents would notice me more, but nope. It was all about Kate's college adventures, Kate's new boyfriend, Kate's future. Then came the big announcement. Kate burst into the house one Sunday afternoon, all smiles and excitement. "Mom, Dad, I'm getting married," she squealed. You'd think she'd just announced she'd cured cancer or something. Mom burst into tears, Dad started whooping and hollering. Me? I just sat there, wondering if anyone remembered I was in the room. Kate turned to me, her eyes shining. "And Lizzie, you'll be my bridesmaid, right?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Sure, Kate. Congratulations." As they all hugged and cried and laughed, I slipped out of the room. No one noticed. They never did. Kate's wedding turned out to be a bigger deal than anyone expected. One evening, I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones in the kitchen. "We'll have to take out a loan," Dad said, his voice strained. Mom sighed. "I know, but it's Kate's big day. We can't let her down." I felt a knot form in my stomach. They were going into debt for Kate's wedding? I wanted to say something, to point out how crazy this was, but I knew better. My opinions didn't matter much in this house. The wedding was a lavish affair. Kate looked like a princess, and our parents beamed with pride. I stood there in my bridesmaid dress, feeling invisible as always. After the honeymoon, Kate dropped another bombshell. "I've decided to be a housewife," she announced over Sunday dinner. "Jack makes enough for both of us." Mom and Dad exchanged glances. I could see the worry in their eyes, but they plastered on smiles. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mom said. "If that's what makes you happy." I wanted to scream. They'd taken out a loan for her wedding, and now she wasn't even going to work? But I kept my mouth shut, pushing my food around my plate. It wasn't long before Kate was pregnant. With twins, no less. Our parents went absolutely nuts. "Twins?" Dad kept saying, shaking his head in wonder. "Can you believe it?" I could believe it. I could also believe what came next. "We should help them buy a house," Mom suggested one night. "They'll need the space with 2 babies on the way." Dad nodded. "We could make the down payment on a mortgage. There's that nice place not far from here." I couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Are you serious?" I blurted out. "You're already in debt from the wedding, and now you want to buy them a house?" They both looked at me like they'd forgotten I was there. Maybe they had. "Elizabeth," Mom said, her voice stern. "This is what family does. We help each other." The twins were born a few months later. 2 little boys, cute as buttons. Mom and Dad were over the moon, spending every free moment at Kate's new house, cooing over the babies. Meanwhile, I was finishing up high school, trying to figure out my next steps. College was the obvious choice, but how was I going to pay for it? One night, I worked up the courage to ask. "Mom, Dad, I've been looking at colleges." "That's nice, dear," Mom said, not looking up from the photo album of the twins she was putting together. I was wondering, could you help me with tuition? They exchanged that look again. The one that said they'd rather be talking about anything else. "Well, sweetie," Dad started, "we'd love to help, but with the loan for Kate's wedding and helping with the house." "We can cover half," Mom jumped in. "But you'll need to figure out the rest on your own." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Half? That's all they could do? After everything they'd done for Kate? But I knew arguing was pointless. "Okay," I said, my voice small. "Thanks." As I walked back to my room, I heard them resume their conversation about the twins' latest accomplishments. I closed my door, leaned against it, and for the first time in years, I let myself cry. I'd managed to get into the local community college, not my dream school, but the only one I could afford with my parents' measly contribution. To make up the difference, I landed a part-time job at a nearby diner. Let me tell you, waiting tables while trying to keep up with college coursework is no picnic. I'd drag myself home most nights, dead on my feet, dreaming of my bed. But even that small comfort was often yanked away from me. It started one Friday evening. I'd just finished a brutal shift and was looking forward to face planting into my pillow when I walked in to find Kate in our living room, the twins crawling around her feet. "Oh, Lizzie," she exclaimed. "Thank God you're here. I'm at my wit's end with these two. Mind watching them for a bit? Jack and I haven't had a date night in ages." Before I could even open my mouth, she was out the door, leaving me with 2 screaming 3-year-olds. "What the hell?" I muttered, staring at my nephews. Don't get me wrong, I love the little terrors, but this wasn't what I signed up for. Mom wandered in from the kitchen. "Your sister is exhausted. This is what family does. Besides, it'll be good practice for when you have your own kids." I wanted to scream. Kids? I was barely keeping my head above water as it was. This became a regular occurrence. Every weekend, without fail, Kate would show up, drop off the twins, and disappear. Sometimes she'd claim she had errands. Other times, she and Jack would go catch a movie or grab dinner. And every time, I'd end up playing babysitter. One Saturday, after a particularly hellish week of exams, I'd had enough. Kate had just breezed out the door, leaving the twins mid-tantrum. "Mom, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't fair. I'm exhausted, I work, I study, and now I'm expected to give up my weekends too?" Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "Lizzie, your sister needs the help. You should be glad to do it." "But what about what I need?" I protested. I'm running myself ragged here. Mom sighed. Elizabeth, don't be selfish. Kate has 2 children to look after. You don't know how hard that is. I gave up. It was clear they weren't going to listen. So I resigned myself to my fate, classes during the week, work in the evenings, and unpaid babysitting on the weekends. Personal life? Huh. That was a joke. The closest thing I had to a social life was making small talk with customers at the diner. Dates? Forget about it. Between work, study, and the twins, I barely had time to shower, let alone meet someone. I was at my breaking point. The constant juggle of work, school, and forced babysitting had left me drained, both physically and mentally. I needed a break, a real one, away from everything and everyone. So, I made a decision. Mom, Dad, I announced one evening, I'm taking a few days off. Going to the beach. Their reaction surprised me. For once, they actually seemed happy for me. That's wonderful, Lizzie, Mom exclaimed. Where are you going? I told them about the cheap motel I'd found online, right by the ocean. Nothing fancy, but it was all I could afford. Dad nodded approvingly. Good for you, kiddo, you deserve a break. I almost fell over from shock. Was this really happening? Were they actually acknowledging my needs for once? The day finally came. I packed my bag, hopped on a bus, and felt the weight lifting off my shoulders with every mile that passed. When I finally arrived at the coast, I couldn't believe my luck. The motel was small and a bit run down, but the ocean view was spectacular. I dropped my bag in the room and headed straight for the beach. The salty air filled my lungs, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I treated myself to lunch at a cute little seaside cafe, savoring every bite. No screaming kids, no homework, no customers to please. Just me, my thoughts, and the sound of the waves. As the sun started to set, I headed back to the motel, already planning my evening of peaceful solitude. But as I approached my room, I heard familiar voices. Surprise, Lizzie! I froze. There, standing outside the room next to mine, were Mom and Kate, with the twins running circles around their legs. What are you doing here? I stammered, my heart sinking. We couldn't let you be all alone on your vacation, Mom chirped. So we decided to join you. We're right next door. I noticed their suitcases outside one of the nicer rooms. Of course, they'd splurged on themselves while I was in the budget option. Before I could process what was happening, Kate was pushing the twins towards me. The boys have been dying to see the ocean. You don't mind watching them for a bit, do you? I want to take a walk on the beach. And I need to run to the store, Mom added. We'll be back soon. Just like that, they were gone, leaving me standing there with 2 overexcited 3-year-olds tugging at my hands. What followed was the worst vacation of my life. The twins were out of control, tearing around my small room like tornadoes. They ripped the curtains, broke glasses, and somehow managed to clog the toilet with apples. I had to shell out money I didn't have for repairs and to call a plumber. By the end of the weekend, I was more exhausted than I'd ever been. The final straw came when Kate had the audacity to complain about how tired she was from all the traveling. I lost it. The argument that followed was epic. I yelled, Mom cried, Kate sulked, and the twins screamed through it all. I packed my bags that night and caught the first bus home in the morning. As I watched the coastline disappear behind me, I felt something shift inside. This couldn't go on. Something had to change. I dragged myself through the front door, exhaustion weighing heavily on my shoulders. Dad was in his usual spot, eyes glued to the TV. He barely grunted a hello as I passed. I crashed into bed that night, my mind a whirlwind of emotions and half-formed plans. When morning came, I knew what I had to do. I was halfway through packing my suitcase when I heard the front door slam. Mom's voice rang out, sharp and irritated. Elizabeth, where are you? She appeared in my doorway, face flushed with anger. I can't believe you just left us there. Do you have any idea how difficult it was to manage the twins on our own? I bit back a retort about how I manage the twins on my own all the time. Instead, I just kept packing. Mom's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. What are you doing? I'm leaving, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm moving out, I need my own life. Their reactions were immediate and predictable. How can you be so selfish? Mom cried. After everything we've done for you. Dad's face turned red. You ungrateful girl. Have you thought about your sister? Who's going to help her with the twins? I felt something snap inside me. My sister? What about me? When has anyone in this family ever thought about what I need? Elizabeth, Mom gasped. No, I'm serious, I pressed on. Kate has a husband. Let him help with the kids. I need to focus on my own life. You listen here, young lady, Dad growled. If you walk out that door, don't expect us to keep paying for your college. You'll be on your own. I looked at them both, these people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. In that moment, I realized they were strangers to me. Fine, I said, zipping up my suitcase. I'd rather be on my own than live like this. No personal life, no time for myself, just constant demands and screaming kids. I'm done. I pushed past them, dragging my suitcase down the stairs. They followed, still shouting, but I tuned them out. As I reached for the door handle, Mom made one last attempt. If you leave now, don't bother coming back. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Then, without looking back, I opened the door and stepped out into the unknown. The next few weeks were a blur. I crashed on a classmate's couch while scrambling to find a more permanent solution. Eventually, I connected with a girl from my study group who was also looking for a roommate. We found a tiny apartment that we could just barely afford between the two of us. With my parents cutting me off financially, I had to pick up more shifts at the diner. I was working almost full-time on top of my classes. There were nights I thought I wouldn't make it, when the exhaustion was so deep I could barely think straight. But you know what? For the first time in my life, I felt free. No one was making demands on my time. No one was guilting me into babysitting or putting their needs before my own. The apartment was small, my bed was a mattress on the floor, but it was mine. I threw myself into my studies with a determination I didn't know I possessed. Every all-nighter, every missed social event, every extra shift, it was all working towards my goal. My future. Before I knew it, 2 years had passed. As I sat in the auditorium on graduation day, waiting for my name to be called, I scanned the crowd. A small part of me hoped to see a familiar face, Mom, Dad, even Kate. But the seats I'd reserved remained empty. Life after college was like stepping into a whole new world. I landed a job at a marketing firm, and suddenly, I had a steady income that wasn't just scraping by. For the first time in years, I could breathe easy. I rented my own apartment, nothing fancy, but it was all mine. No roommates, no family drama, just peace and quiet. And let me tell you, it was glorious. I started doing all those normal things I'd missed out on before. I went on dates, made new friends, even had a couple of short-lived relationships. Nothing serious, but it was fun to just be young and carefree for once. My parents? They were still in the picture, but barely. We'd talk maybe once a month, stilted conversations full of awkward silences and thinly veiled disapproval. They were still sore about me moving out, and I wasn't exactly rushing to mend fences. Then came my 25th birthday. I had plans with friends, nothing wild, just dinner and drinks. But a week before, I got a call from Mom. Elizabeth, she said, her voice oddly cheerful, we want you to come over for your birthday. The whole family will be there. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived at my parents' house, it was like stepping back in time. Kate and her husband were there, the twins, now 7 years old, running around like little tornadoes. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins milled about, all smiles and hugs. "Happy birthday, Lizzie," they chorused as I walked in. I plastered on a smile, accepting hugs and well wishes. Then came the gifts. Most were typical: clothes, books, gift cards. But then Mom handed me an envelope with a flourish. "This is from all of us," she said, beaming. I opened it, my stomach sinking as I saw what was inside. A ticket to a beach resort. "We're all going," Dad announced proudly. "A big family vacation. We've paid for everything." I froze. A family vacation with the twins? It was my ruined beach trip all over again. I opened my mouth to refuse, but Mom squeezed my arm, whispering harshly, "Don't you dare make a scene. Not in front of everyone." So I smiled and thanked them, all the while screaming internally. The party wound down, relatives trickled out, and finally, it was just us, me, Mom, Dad, Kate, and her family. That's when I let loose. "I'm not going," I said flatly. "What?" Kate gasped. "But it's a family trip." "Exactly," I replied. "And I'm not interested in spending my vacation babysitting your kids again." Kate burst into tears. "You don't love us at all, do you? You don't care about your nephews." "I care about them just fine," I snapped. "But if I wanted kids, I'd have my own." The argument went round and round. Mom called me ungrateful, Dad looked disappointed, Kate kept crying. They all tried to guilt me, to pressure me into giving in. "Fine," I said finally, my voice tired. "I'll go." They all looked relieved, like they'd won some great victory. But they had no idea what was coming. The day of departure arrived, and I found myself at the airport, surrounded by my overly cheerful family. Kate and her husband were practically bouncing with excitement, already making plans for all the alone time they'd have while I watched the twins. "You'll have so much fun with Aunt Lizzie," Kate told the boys, winking at me. "She'll take you to the beach, build sandcastles, maybe even go snorkeling." Mom and Dad were beaming too, going on about how nice it would be for Kate to have a break. Not once did anyone ask what I wanted to do on this vacation. It was clear they all saw me as nothing more than a convenient babysitter. As we approached the check-in counter, I made my move. "Oh," I exclaimed, feigning discomfort. "I need to use the restroom." "You guys go ahead and check in. I'll meet you at the gate." They nodded, distracted by wrangling luggage and excited children. I watched them join the queue, then turned and walked briskly in the opposite direction. My heart was pounding as I approached a different check-in counter. I handed over my passport and the ticket I'd bought weeks ago, a flight to a small, peaceful island resort. Once through security, I found a quiet corner and pulled out my phone. My hand shook slightly as I typed out a message to Mom, "I'm not coming with you, I'm going on my own vacation. Enjoy your trip." I hit send and immediately turned off my phone, not wanting to deal with the fallout just yet. I could almost hear the explosion of anger and disbelief that would be happening at the other check-in counter. As I settled into my seat on the plane, I turned my phone back on briefly. It immediately exploded with notifications, missed calls, voicemails, angry texts. I listened to one voicemail from Mom, her voice shrill and furious. "Elizabeth Morgan. How dare you abandon your family like this? You've ruined everything. Your sister is in tears, her husband is furious, they were counting on you to watch the boys. And I had plans. You are the most selfish, ungrateful." As the plane took off, I sipped my champagne and gazed out the window. The guilt was still there, a small knot in my stomach. I knew I'd have to deal with the fallout eventually. There would be angry phone calls, tearful accusations, probably another round of being called selfish and ungrateful. But overwhelmingly, I felt free. Light. Like I could finally breathe. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I was going on a trip that was just for me. No obligations, no babysitting, no family drama. Just me, the beach, and whatever I decided I wanted to do. As the plane touched down on the small, tropical island, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The warm breeze that greeted me as I stepped off the plane seemed to whisper, "Welcome to freedom." I checked into my resort, a modest but charming place right on the beach. As I unpacked, curiosity got the better of me, and I turned on my phone. Instantly, it exploded with notifications. Hundreds of text messages, missed calls, and voicemails flooded in. With a mix of amusement and trepidation, I scrolled through some of the messages. "How could you do this to us, Mom? You ruined everything, Kate. You're so selfish, Elizabeth, Dad." I couldn't help but smile. For once, I had chosen myself over their demands. I turned the phone off again and tossed it into the hotel safe. For the next week, I was unreachable. And what a week it was. I lounged on the beach, read books uninterrupted, went snorkeling, and even tried my hand at surfing. I chatted with other vacationers, went on a few casual dates, and stayed out as late as I wanted. No schedule, no responsibilities, no screaming kids. Just me and the rhythm of the waves. All too soon, it was time to head home. I returned to my apartment tanned, rested, and more centered than I'd felt in years. But the real world was waiting to intrude on my newfound peace. The very next day, there was a pounding on my door. I opened it to find Mom and Kate, faces red with anger. "How dare you?" Mom screeched, barging in without invitation. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Kate wasn't far behind. "You ruined our entire vacation." The boys were devastated. They launched into a tirade, their voices overlapping as they hurled accusations and insults. I was selfish, ungrateful, a terrible daughter and sister. I owed them for the ticket they'd bought me, for the vacation I'd ruined, for the childcare I'd failed to provide. I let them rant for a few minutes, their words washing over me without sticking. Then, calmly but firmly, I spoke. "That's enough," I said, my voice cutting through their noise. "I don't owe you anything. Not money, not childcare, not my time. I'm an adult, and I get to make my own choices." Mom opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. "I'm not discussing this further. Please leave. When you're ready to treat me with respect and have a calm conversation, we can talk. Until then, I think it's best we don't communicate." They stared at me, shocked into silence. Then, with a few more choice words, they stormed out. As the door slammed behind them, I let out a long breath. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. Over the next few weeks, I made some big changes. I found a new apartment in a different part of town and moved without telling my family my new address. I threw myself into my work and picked up some new hobbies, painting, yoga, even started learning a new language. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, pangs of guilt. But every time I came home to my peaceful apartment, every time I made plans without worrying about babysitting duties, every time I pursued a new interest just because I wanted to, I knew I'd made the right choice. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe someday, my family and I will find a way to have a healthy relationship. Maybe not. But I do know this, I'll face whatever comes on my own terms, standing tall and unapologetic in the life I've chosen for myself. I'm Anna, the afterthought in a family of geniuses. My parents, both big shots at the university, had their lives all mapped out. Then I showed up, uninvited and unexpected. "We found out too late," Mom would often say, her voice thick with regret. By the time we knew, it was already too late for other options. My sister Sarah and I were born just 11 months apart. We looked like twins, but that's where the similarities ended. She was the brain, I was the heart. From day one, it was clear who the favorite was. "Look, John. Sarah's reading already," Mom exclaimed one day when I was about 3. Sarah sat in the corner, nose buried in a book meant for kids twice her age. That pretty much set the tone for our childhood. Sarah devoured books, I devoured life. She memorized complex texts, I struggled to remember what I had for breakfast. I was diligent, hardworking. But no matter how hard I worked, it never seemed to be enough. "Anna," Mom said one day, exasperation clear in her voice. How many times do I have to explain this? It's simple addition. I stared at the numbers, willing them to make sense. But they danced across the page, mocking me. Meanwhile, Sarah breezed through her advanced math homework in the next room. But where I lacked in academics, I made up for in personality. I was the class clown, the life of the party. My laughter was infectious, to everyone except my parents. One evening at dinner, I was telling a joke I'd heard at school. And then the chicken said, "Anna," Mom's sharp voice cut through my story. "Enough. Laughing for no reason is a sign of low intelligence. Please control yourself." I felt my cheeks burn with shame. Across the table, Sarah smirked, her eyes never leaving her book on quantum physics. As elementary school progressed, the divide only deepened. Sarah collected academic awards like they were going out of style. Me? I was lucky if I got a gold star for attendance. I'll never forget the day of the school science fair in 5th grade. Sarah's project on cellular mitosis won first place. Mine, well, let's just say my baking soda volcano didn't exactly erupt as planned. As we drove home, the car filled with praise for Sarah's achievement. I sat in the back, covered in dried baking soda, feeling smaller by the minute. "Well," Dad finally said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror, "I suppose not everyone in the family can be scientifically inclined." Mom nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's clear Anna doesn't have the aptitude for it. What will our colleagues think?" I sank lower in my seat, wishing I could disappear. That was the moment I realized I'd never be able to maintain their precious status in the scientific community. In their eyes, I was the disappointment, the one who couldn't carry on their legacy. As we got older, the gap between Sarah and me only widened. Sarah was whisked off to science camps, math competitions, and academic decathlons. Me? I was left with our elderly babysitter, Mrs. Jenkins. But you know what? Mrs. Jenkins was a godsend. While my parents were grooming Sarah to be the next Einstein, Mrs. Jenkins was teaching me skills that would serve me well in the real world. "Come on, Anna," she'd say, her wrinkled hands guiding mine as we kneaded dough. "Let me show you how to make a pie that'll knock their socks off." Other days, we'd clip coupons and plan grocery lists. "Listen here, girl," she'd say, her eyes twinkling. "Knowing how to stretch a dollar is just as important as knowing how to split an atom." But the best lessons came during our heart-to-heart talks. "Anna, sweetie," she said one day as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "Not everyone's born a genius, but everyone can make the world a little better. You remember that." Those words became my lifeline in a house where I never seemed to measure up. At school, Sarah continued to shine. She participated in every academic competition, bringing home trophies and medals that Mom would display proudly in the living room. My report cards, on the other hand, were hidden away in a drawer, never to see the light of day. High school was a struggle. While Sarah breezed through AP classes and SAT prep, I was just trying to keep my head above water. Math was my nemesis, and no matter how hard I tried, the numbers just wouldn't cooperate. The day we got our SAT scores was the final straw. Sarah, of course, had aced it. Me? Let's just say my score wouldn't be getting me into any colleges. "A dumbass, that's what you are," Dad yelled, waving my score report in my face. "How can you be so stupid? It's simple addition, for God's sake." Mom stood by, shaking her head in disgust. "And Sarah?" She leaned against the doorframe, a smug smile playing on her lips. Not once did she step in to defend me. Not once did she offer to help. She just watched, probably thinking how lucky she was to be the smart one. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, as my parents continued their tirade. "You can't even add 2 plus 2. How do you expect to get into college? To make something of yourself?" Their words cut deep, each one a reminder of how I'd never be good enough. But somewhere in the midst of their shouting, I felt something else stirring. Anger, determination. A fierce desire to prove them wrong. As I lay in bed that night, their harsh words still ringing in my ears, I made a decision. I might not be cut out for college, at least not right now. But that didn't mean I couldn't make something of myself. The day after graduation, I marched into Sunny's supermarket and got myself a job as a cashier. It wasn't glamorous, but you know what? For the first time in my life, I had something that was all my own. Within weeks, I was pulling in my own paychecks. I told my parents I'd found a job, but they barely looked up from their papers. They didn't ask where or what I was doing, and honestly, I was relieved. At least this way, they couldn't disapprove. I was still living at home, but now I had my own money. It wasn't much, but it was enough to have a little fun without having to beg my parents for cash. "Anna, you coming to the beach this weekend?" My friend and co-worker from the store Lisa would call, and I'd grin, knowing I could say yes without worrying about the cost. While Sarah spent her summer buried in textbooks, preparing for her first semester at some fancy Ivy League school, I was living it up. Weekends at the beach, movie nights with friends, impromptu road trips, I was finally free to be me. Weeks turned into months, and I settled into my new life. Sure, it wasn't the life my parents had envisioned for me, but I was happy. Really happy. Then came that day. The day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the store was quiet, and I was restocking the gum display when I heard the automatic doors swish open. I looked up, my customary greeting on my lips, and froze. There, looking as prim and proper as ever, was my mother. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I saw the shock in her eyes, followed quickly by embarrassment. She turned, clearly intending to leave without a word. But some part of me, some naive, hopeful part, called out, "Mom, hey." She turned slowly, her face a mask of disdain. "Anna," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment, "what are you doing here?" I gestured to my name tag, trying to keep my voice light. "I work here. Have been for a few months now." Her eyes narrowed. "A saleswoman? Really, Anna? The daughter of a professor, reduced to this?" She waved her hand dismissively at the store around us. "What will our colleagues think if they find out my daughter is the lowest rung on the social ladder?" Her words hit me like a slap. I'd been proud of my independence, of earning my own way. But in her eyes, I was just an embarrassment. "I'm working honestly," I managed to say, my voice small. "I'm not doing anything wrong." But Mom was beyond reason. Her voice rose, drawing the attention of the few customers in the store. "You will quit this job immediately, do you hear me? I will not have you embarrassing our family like this. And you can forget about living under our roof if this is the path you choose." I stood there, rooted to the spot, as she stormed out of the store. The automatic doors swished closed behind her, leaving a deafening silence in her wake. That night, I returned home with a heavy heart and tear-stained cheeks. The house was quiet, but the silence felt oppressive. Without a word, I went to my room and started packing. As I was zipping up my last suitcase, Mom appeared in the doorway. Instead of the concern I'd foolishly hoped for, her face showed only relief. "So, you finally decided to leave," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Good, it's for the best." Dad appeared behind her, nodding in agreement. "Remember to change your surname," he added. "We can't have you disgracing our family name with your choices." Their words stung, but I was beyond tears now. "Fine," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'll take Grandpa's name. At least he knew how to love unconditionally." I grabbed my bags and walked out, not looking back. They didn't ask for my new address, and I didn't offer it. The next day, I moved in with Lisa. We'd become fast friends over the past few months, and when I told her what happened, she didn't hesitate to offer me her spare room. One lazy Sunday afternoon, as Lisa and I were scrolling through social media, I came across Sarah's profile. My finger hesitated over the unfollow button, but curiosity got the better of me. Sarah's feed was a parade of achievements. Photos of her receiving awards, status updates about her latest research breakthroughs, announcements of her admission to elite scientific societies. Each post had hundreds of likes and comments, all singing her praises. "Your sister?" Lisa asked, peering over my shoulder. "Have you talked to her recently?" I shook my head, remembering our last interaction. It was a few weeks after I'd left home. In a moment of weakness, I'd reached out to Sarah, suggesting we meet for coffee. Her response was cold and dismissive. "Anna, I'm afraid we don't have much in common anymore. Our interests and, frankly, our levels of development are quite different now. I don't think meeting would be productive for either of us." That was the last time we communicated directly. Despite the rift with my immediate family, I stayed in touch with my extended relatives. Aunt Martha, in particular, became a source of comfort and connection to my roots. During one of our regular phone calls, she let slip some information that simultaneously hurt and validated my decision to leave. "Oh, Anna," she sighed, her voice heavy with sadness. "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but your parents, they always ask if you'll be at family gatherings. If we say yes, they refuse to come. They say it's because you're beneath their status now, and they can't bear to be in the same room as you." I felt a familiar ache in my chest, but it was duller now. "It's okay, Aunt Martha," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. "I'm happy with my life now. If they can't accept that, it's their loss." And it was true. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had a job I enjoyed, friends who accepted me for who I was, and a growing sense of self-worth that had nothing to do with academic achievements or social status. 5 years had passed since I'd walked out of my parents' house, and life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. I'd been promoted to assistant manager at the store, my circle of friends had grown, and I'd even started taking some online classes in business management. I was content, but something was missing. That all changed on a balmy summer evening. My friends had organized a beach bonfire, and I noticed him. He was standing a little apart from the group, looking slightly out of place in his button-down shirt and khakis. But it was his eyes that caught my attention, they seemed to sparkle with curiosity as he took in the scene around him. I made my way over, extending my hand. "Hi, I'm Anna. You look like you could use a S more." He laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made me smile. "I'm David. And yes, I could definitely use a S more. It's been years since I've had one." As we roasted marshmallows, we got to talking. Turns out, David was an environmental scientist, fresh off a research expedition in the Amazon. We talked for hours that night, about everything and nothing. David was fascinated by my stories of customer service adventures, and I was enthralled by his passion for the environment. As the weeks turned into months, David and I grew closer. He didn't care that I hadn't gone to college or that I worked as a saleswoman. He loved my quick wit, my ability to make friends with anyone, and what he called my refreshing perspective on life. I met his family at a dinner party 6 months into our relationship. I was nervous, after all, they were all accomplished scientists. But to my surprise, they welcomed me with open arms. Throughout the evening, they asked about my job, my interests, my dreams. Not once did they ask about my education or my family background. It was refreshing. A year to the day after we met, David proposed. It was nothing grand, just the two of us, on the same beach where we'd first talked. But it was perfect. We planned a small wedding, just close friends and family. As I addressed the invitations, I hesitated over 3 names, Mom, Dad, and Sarah. Despite everything, a part of me still hoped. But the RSVPs came back, and those 3 remained silent. Life with David was everything I'd ever dreamed of and more. We'd settled into a cozy routine, balancing his research work with my job at the store. But as content as I was, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant for something more. That something more came on a lazy Sunday afternoon at David's parents' house. We were all lounging in the backyard, enjoying the warm sunshine and cold lemonade, when the conversation turned to David's latest research. The amount of plastic waste we're producing is staggering, David sighed, running a hand through his hair. And the worst part is, most of it ends up in landfills or the ocean. His father nodded gravely. It's a crisis, no doubt about it. But what can we do? People aren't going to stop using plastic overnight. As they continued discussing the problem, an idea started forming in my mind. Years of working retail had taught me a thing or two about what people want and need. And all those hours I'd spent with Mrs. Jenkins, learning to be resourceful and creative, suddenly came rushing back. Before I knew it, I was grabbing a napkin and a pen from the table. What if, I started, my voice trembling with excitement, what if we could turn that plastic waste into something useful? Something people actually want? 3 pairs of eyes turned to me, curious. Encouraged, I continued, sketching rapidly on the napkin. Like this, I said, holding up my crude drawing. Garden furniture made entirely from recycled plastic. Durable, weather-resistant, and eco-friendly. We could even make it modular, so people can customize their own designs. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, I feared I'd overstepped, that they'd laugh at my silly idea. But then, Anna, David's father said slowly, his eyes wide with amazement, that's brilliant. David was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Do you know how many environmental problems this could solve? And the market potential, it's enormous. His mother chimed in, and it's not just garden furniture. Think of all the urban applications, park benches, playground equipment, even building materials. What happened next was a whirlwind. David's parents, excited by the potential of the idea, offered to invest in making it a reality. Before I knew it, we were setting up a company, with me, yes, me, Anna Holloway, former family disappointment, as the CEO. David, with his scientific background, took charge of developing the technology to recycle and mold the plastic efficiently. I focused on design and marketing, drawing on my years of customer service experience to create products people would love. 6 months after that fateful Sunday afternoon, we launched our first line of garden furniture. The response was overwhelming. People loved the sleek designs, the eco-friendly concept, and the story behind it all. Encouraged by our success, we expanded our range. Urban planners started reaching out, interested in using our recycled plastic products for city projects. And then, the call that changed everything, the mayor's office wanted to meet with us. We met and signed a contract for the improvement of the city. 3 years had passed since that fateful day in David's parents' backyard. Our company, EcoRenew, had grown beyond our wildest dreams. We'd recycled tons of plastic waste, transformed city parks, and even started branching out into eco-friendly building materials. And now, here we were, about to receive a state award for innovation and environmental impact. As David and I stood in the grand ballroom, surrounded by the creme de la creme of the scientific and business world, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. We made our way through the crowd, stopping to chat with various dignitaries and fellow innovators. I was in the middle of a conversation with the city's head of urban development when I saw them. My parents and Sarah, standing near the refreshment table. They looked different. Mom and Dad had aged considerably, their hair more gray than I remembered. And Sarah, always so put together, looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. For a moment, our eyes met across the room. I saw the shock register on their faces, clearly not expecting to see me in such a setting. I turned to David, linking my arm through his. "Let's go find your parents," I said, perhaps a bit louder than necessary. As we walked past my family, I kept my eyes forward, chin held high. We found David's parents near the stage, beaming with pride. As we chatted about the upcoming ceremony, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. My mother was approaching, her eyes fixed on David's mom. "Excuse me," I heard her say, her voice sickly sweet. "I couldn't help but notice your lovely family. You must be so proud of your son and his wife?" I tensed, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But my mother-in-law just smiled warmly. "Oh, we are. Anna is a remarkable woman, We're lucky to have her in our family." As she walked back to my father and Sarah, I could see them huddling together, whispering furiously. I caught snippets of their conversation. "Can't believe it's her. Married into a family of scientists. Probably just here as his plus one." The moment had finally arrived. As the presenter called my name, announcing EcoRenew as the recipient of the State Environmental Innovation Award, I felt a surge of pride. I walked onto the stage, my heart pounding with excitement. As I reached for the microphone, ready to deliver the speech I'd carefully prepared, chaos erupted. My mother rushed onto the stage. Before I could react, she had grabbed my arm and snatched the microphone from my hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice quavering with emotion, "I am the proud mother of this brilliant, worthy woman." She gestured dramatically towards me. "We always knew Anna would become someone extraordinary." I stood there, frozen in disbelief, as she continued her performance, even managing to squeeze out a few tears. The audience, recognizing the famous Professor Anderson, broke into applause. In that moment, rage and hurt bubbled up inside me, years of neglect, disappointment, and rejection crystallizing into a single, burning point of resolve. I would not let her steal this moment. I gently but firmly took the microphone back from her. "Thank you, Mother," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "If I could have a moment of silence, please." The room hushed, all eyes on me. "Yes, I am the daughter of the renowned Professors Anderson," I began, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "But I stand before you today not because of them, but despite them." I saw shock ripple through the audience, my mother's face paling beside me. I recounted the years of missed school events, of being told I was an embarrassment, of being asked to change my name and move out. I worked as a saleswoman, hiding my identity, because my own parents were ashamed of me. The room was dead silent, hanging on every word. But today, I stand before you not as a failure, but as a success. Not because of my family name, but because of the family I chose. I looked towards David and his parents, seeing tears in their eyes. My husband, David, and his wonderful parents saw potential in me when no one else did. They encouraged my ideas, supported my dreams. It's thanks to them that EcoRenew exists, that we've been able to make a difference in our environment and our community. I gestured for David to join me on stage. As he walked up, I saw my father and Sarah slip out of the hall, unable to bear the scrutiny of the crowd. "This award," I continued, holding up the plaque, "is a testament to what can happen when you believe in someone, when you nurture their potential instead of crushing their spirit. It's proof that intelligence comes in many forms, and that kindness and support can change lives." I turned to my mother, still standing shell-shocked beside me. "I'm sorry, but I can't accept your sudden pride in me. You lost that right years ago." "My real family is here," I said, putting my arm around David. The hall erupted in applause, people rising to their feet. I saw tears, heard whispers of admiration and support. David's parents were openly crying, beaming with pride. In the days that followed, I heard through the grapevine that my parents and Sarah were facing backlash in their academic circles. People were shocked by their treatment of me, and many were reconsidering their associations with them. Part of me felt guilty for exposing them, for complicating their lives, as they put it. But a stronger part knew that I had done nothing wrong. I had simply told the truth, a truth that had been silenced for far too long. As for me, life went on. EcoRenew continued to grow and innovate. David and I started talking about starting a family of our own. And every day, I woke up grateful for the life I had built, for the family I had chosen, and for the strength I had found within myself. My name's Monica, and I don't remember a time when my parents weren't fighting. Their screaming matches are some of my earliest memories, filling our house with tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. I was just a kid, but even then, I knew something was seriously wrong. I was 4 when everything came to a head. Mom and Dad's arguments had gotten worse, if that was even possible. One night, I woke up to the sound of shattering glass and my mom yelling, "That's it, Mark, I've had enough." The next morning, Dad was gone. Just like that, my family was torn in two. It didn't take long for Dad to move on. Within months, he'd remarried some woman named Caroline and moved across town. From then on, our relationship became a joke. He'd call on holidays, his voice distant and awkward like he was talking to a stranger, not his own kid. The rest of the year, the only sign I had of father was the monthly alimony check he sent to Mom. Mom, for her part, was a mess. Linda Thompson, once the picture of a happy housewife, now a single mother, struggling to keep it together. She threw herself into her work as a real estate agent, but it was obvious she was floundering. I was 7 when Mom started getting weird. She'd always been a bit impulsive, but this was different. One day, she came home with a bunch of books and DVDs about day trading. "This is it, Monica," she said, her eyes shining with a manic gleam that scared me a little. "We're going to be rich." For weeks, she was glued to her computer, muttering about stocks and trades. She'd forget to pick me up from school, or to make dinner. When I'd ask her to play with me, she'd wave me off. "Not now, sweetie. Mommy's working on our future." But our future wasn't looking too bright. I learned to fend for myself pretty quick. By 8, I could make my own meals, even if it was just a peanut butter sandwich, do my own laundry, and get myself ready for school. Mom was too caught up in her get-rich-quick schemes to notice. Things came to a head when I was 9. Mom burst into my room one day, her eyes wild with excitement. "I'm going on a trip to Bali. I've found someone who can help us, sweetie. He's going to show me how to unlock my luck chakra. This is going to change everything." I didn't know what a luck chakra was, but I knew it sounded like trouble. And just like that, I was shipped off to Aunt Rachel's, my mom's friend, while Mom chased her latest crazy scheme halfway across the world. For 6 long weeks, I lived with Aunt Rachel while Mom was off on her spiritual journey in Bali. Don't get me wrong, Rachel was great. She really tried to make things normal for me. "Come on, Monica," she'd say with forced cheerfulness every morning. "Time for summer camp." I'd drag myself out of bed, pretending to be excited about another day of crafts and organized fun while my mind was miles away, wondering what the hell Mom was doing on the other side of the world. Weekends with Rachel were better. We'd go to the zoo or the beach, and for a few hours, I could almost forget the mess my life had become. But then I'd catch her looking at me with pity in her eyes, and reality would come crashing back. When Mom finally came back, it was like she was a whole new person. Her eyes were bright, her smile wide, and she couldn't stop talking about positive thinking and manifesting wealth. "Monica, sweetie, our lives are about to change," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of incense and something else I couldn't quite place. "I've unlocked my true potential. You'll see." It started small. A lottery ticket here, a scratch card there. Mom would come home giddy with excitement over a $20 win, treating me to pizza and new clothes like we were millionaires. "See, Monica? The universe is rewarding us," she'd say, waving the ticket in the air like it was made of gold. I should have known it was too good to be true. Soon, the small bets weren't enough. That's when the casino trip started. The first time she went, she came home at dawn, reeking of cigarettes and cheap perfume, but grinning from ear to ear. "I won $500, she exclaimed, throwing a wad of cash on the kitchen table. "This is just the beginning, honey. Soon, we'll be living in a mansion." I forced a smile, but my stomach was in knots. Something told me this wasn't going to end well. As the weeks went by, Mom's trips to the casino became more frequent. Sometimes she'd win, coming home in a whirlwind of manic energy, talking a mile a minute about her system and how she'd cracked the code. But more often, she'd slink in quietly, her eyes red and puffy, smelling of booze and defeat. The good days were getting rarer, and the bad days, well, they were getting a lot worse. One weekend, Mom disappeared for 2 whole days. She left me with a stack of frozen dinners and a stern warning. "Remember, Monica, this is our little secret," she said, her eyes hard. If anyone asks, I'm not feeling well and I'm resting in my room. Got it? When she finally came home Sunday night, she looked like hell. Her clothes were rumpled, her hair a mess, and she couldn't even look me in the eye. Mommy just had a bit of bad luck. But don't worry, it'll turn around soon. I can feel it. But it didn't turn around. The trips got longer, the losses bigger. I started dreading the sound of her key in the lock in the early hours of the morning. A quiet entry meant a good night at the tables. A slam meant losses, and those were happening more and more often. Grandma Elizabeth was like a breath of fresh air in the suffocating mess my life had become. She lived in the next state over, but she made a point of visiting every few months. Those visits became my lifeline, a glimpse of normalcy in the chaos. But they were also incredibly stressful. The minute we got word that Grandma was coming, Mom would go into full-on panic mode. "Monica," she'd yell, already pulling out cleaning supplies. "We need to get this place in shape. Your grandmother can't see it like this." And so began the frenzied cleaning sprees. We'd spend days scrubbing, dusting, and hiding evidence of Mom's hobby. Dirty dishes that had been piling up for weeks suddenly vanished. The overflowing ashtrays were emptied, and the lingering smell of stale smoke was masked with air freshener. But the worst part wasn't the cleaning, but the lying. "Now remember," Mom would coach me, her eyes hard and serious, "everything's great. I'm doing well at work, and we're very happy. Got it?" When Grandma Elizabeth would finally arrive, I'd plaster on a fake smile and pretend everything was just peachy. But inside, I was screaming. I wanted so badly to tell her the truth, to beg her to take me away from all this. But I couldn't. I couldn't betray Mom like that. Grandma Elizabeth didn't know that the money she kept sending us, money meant for my care and education, was going straight into the casinos. Mom would cash the checks and be out the door before the ink was dry, chasing that elusive big win that would solve all our problems. As I got older, it became harder to ignore the reality of our situation. There were days when the fridge stood empty, and I'd have to ration my school lunches to make them last through dinner. On my 12th birthday, Grandma Elizabeth made a gesture that would change everything. She came to visit, bringing with her a shiny new smartphone, the kind all the cool kids at school had. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said, handing me the gift-wrapped box. "Linda, I've got something for you too. I've opened a college fund for Monica. It's in your name since she's still a minor, but it's for her future. Just promise me you'll use it wisely." Mom nodded, tears in her eyes. "I swear, Elizabeth. I'll never touch that money for anything else. Monica's future means everything to me." As I hugged my grandmother goodbye later that day, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the turning point. Maybe now, with my future secure, Mom would finally get the help she needed. At first everything was fine. Mom started going to Gamblers Anonymous meetings, picked up some real estate clients again. I threw myself into my studies, daring to dream about college and a future free from the chaos of the past few years. But like all the times before, Mom's resolve didn't last. Within months, she was back to her old habits. The excuses started small. "I'm just too tired for the meeting tonight, honey. I'll go next week." But next week never came. Soon, she was disappearing for days at a time again, leaving me to fend for myself. I was 13 now, and I'd become scarily good at being the adult in our household. I could forge Mom's signature perfectly on school documents, a skill born from necessity rather than rebellion. I even taught myself to cook, whipping up simple meals from whatever I could scrounge up in our perpetually bare pantry. Anything to keep my stomach from growling during class. As I entered high school, I withdrew more and more. Making friends felt impossible. How could I invite anyone over when I never knew what state the house, or Mom, would be in? The few times I tried to open up, I was met with blank stares or awkward silence. No one could understand what my life was really like. By 16, I was desperate for some control over my life. That's when I decided to get a job. The local coffee shop was hiring, and to my surprise, the manager hired me on the spot. That coffee shop became my sanctuary. For a few hours each day, I could pretend to be normal. Just another teen working her first job, not the daughter of a gambling addict, barely keeping her head above water. And the money, well, it wasn't much, but it was mine. But reality has a way of shattering even the most carefully constructed illusions. One night, after a late shift at the coffee shop, I came home to find the front door unlocked. Alarm bells went off in my head immediately. Mom might be irresponsible, but she always locked the door. The house was a disaster. Clothes strewn everywhere, dishes piled in the sink, and a smell I couldn't quite place hanging in the air. Then I heard it, muffled sobs coming from the living room. I found Mom sprawled on the floor, an empty wine bottle clutched to her chest like a lifeline. She was on the phone, her words slurred and barely coherent. "I've lost everything," she was saying, her voice breaking. "Just one more chance. I know I can turn it around with one big win." My blood ran cold. I knew, with a certainty that made me sick to my stomach, what she was talking about. I waited until Mom passed out, snoring on the living room floor, before I made my move. With shaking hands, I opened her laptop. It took me a few tries to find the right banking app and guess the password. But when I did, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. The account was empty. Completely drained. Years of saving, Grandma's generous gift, my entire future, gone. I stormed into the living room where Mom was still passed out. I shook her awake, my hands trembling with rage. "Mom, wake up. We need to talk about the money." She blinked at me, confusion and pain etched across her face. "What? Monica, what are you talking about?" "The college fund, Mom. The one Grandma set up for me. The one you swore you'd never touch. It's gone." For a moment, she just stared at me. Then she tried to deny it, her voice weak and unconvincing. No, you must be mistaken. I would never." But as I laid out the evidence, the empty account, the late-night phone call I'd overheard, her denials crumbled. In their place came the accusations. "You ungrateful brat," she screamed, her face contorted with rage and shame. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? Snooping through my private information?" It was like a dam had burst. Years of resentment, fear, and disappointment came pouring out of both of us. We screamed and cried, hurling bitter words at each other like weapons. And then it happened. In a moment of blind fury, Mom's hand lashed out, catching me across the face. The force of the blow knocked me back, and I felt a sharp sting where her ring had cut my cheek. I raised a hand to my throbbing cheek, feeling the warm trickle of blood. Without a word, I turned and fled to my room, locking the door behind me. I slid down to the floor, my back against the door, and finally let the tears come. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here anymore. I packed a backpack with some clothes and the little money I'd saved from my coffee shop job. As the first light of dawn crept through my window, I slipped out of the house without a backwards glance. When I showed up on Dad's doorstep, his reaction was lukewarm at best. He invited me in awkwardly, shooting apologetic glances at Caroline, his wife, who didn't even try to hide her annoyance at my presence. I poured out the whole story: Mom's gambling, the empty college fund, the fight. I watched Dad's face change from shock to anger and finally to a resigned weariness that made my heart sink. I spent that night in their guest room, feeling like an intruder in what should have been my second home. As I lay there, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, I realized I'd been foolish to hope for rescue. My suspicions were confirmed the next evening when I overheard Dad on the phone with Mom. "You need to come get her, Linda," he hissed, his voice low but clear through the thin walls. "This isn't my problem. I've been paying child support for years. That should have been more than enough to cover her education." I crept back to the guest room, my heart heavy with the final death of a hope I hadn't even realized I'd been clinging to. As I sat on the edge of the bed, I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't stay here. The next morning, I sat on the bus, my backpack clutched to my chest, watching the miles tick by. I was headed to Grandma Elizabeth's house in the next state over. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had left. My stomach churned with anxiety. What if Grandma turned me away too? What if Mom had already gotten to her with lies and excuses? I'd been let down so many times before, I wasn't sure I could handle another rejection. When I finally arrived at Grandma Elizabeth's house, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I stood on her porch for what felt like hours, trying to work up the courage to knock. But I needn't have worried. The moment Grandma opened the door and saw me standing there, her face went from shocked to concerned to fiercely protective in the span of seconds. "Monica, sweetheart, what are you doing here? Are you all right?" Before I knew it, I was wrapped in her arms, sobbing out the whole miserable story. The gambling, the lies, the empty college fund, the fight with Mom, Dad's rejection, all of it came pouring out in a flood of tears and broken words. Grandma listened to it all, her face growing stormier with each revelation. When I finally finished, she cupped my face in her hands, her eyes blazing with determination. "You're safe now, honey," she said, her voice firm and reassuring. "We're going to fix this. Together." Grandma Elizabeth wasted no time. She called her friend who was a lawyer, discussing terms like paternal rights and gambling that made my head spin. But mostly, she was preparing for the confrontation I knew was coming. When Mom finally arrived, summoned by Grandma's demands, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked small and defeated, nothing like the towering figure of my childhood. But the moment she opened her mouth, I realized some things hadn't changed at all. "Elizabeth, thank goodness you called," Mom said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I've been so worried about Monica. She's been acting out, telling wild stories. I just don't know what to do with her anymore. I've tried my best, but she's been so difficult, so ungrateful." But Grandma Elizabeth wasn't buying it. Without a word, she opened her laptop and pulled up the bank statements showing the now empty college fund. "Would you care to explain this, Linda?" Grandma asked, her voice ice cold. The color drained from Mom's face as she stared at the screen. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. It was like watching a balloon deflate. "I can explain," she finally stammered. "Things have been tough, and I just needed to borrow a little. I was going to pay it back." But her excuses were weak, and she knew it. I could see the panic in her eyes as she realized she wasn't going to be able to lie her way out of this one. And then, in a last desperate attempt to regain control, Mom's face hardened. "You know what? I don't have to explain myself to you. I'm Monica's mother. That money was in my name. I had every right to spend it how I saw fit." Grandma Elizabeth's eyes flashed with a fierce determination I'd never seen before. She leaned forward, her voice low and dangerous. "You're right about one thing, Linda. There's no legal document stating that money was exclusively for Monica's education. It was a trust placed in you, which you betrayed. But let me be clear about what I can do." Mom's smug expression faltered as Grandma continued. "That house you've been living in? The one you've neglected for years? I bought that as an investment property. And I'm selling it. Immediately." Mom's face went pale. "You can't do that. Where will we live?" "We?" Grandma raised an eyebrow. "There is no we, Linda. The proceeds from the sale will go towards Monica's education and setting her up with a small apartment near her chosen college." I felt a surge of hope, quickly followed by fear as I saw Mom's face contort with rage. But Grandma wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm suing for custody of Monica. Your gambling addiction, financial abuse, and that little physical altercation you had? All grounds for termination of parental rights." The room fell silent. I held my breath, watching Mom's face as the reality of her situation sank in. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. What followed was a whirlwind of legal activity. Mom, faced with losing everything, fought back hard at first. She hired this slick lawyer who tried to paint me as some troubled teen and Grandma as a meddling old woman. But the evidence against Mom was overwhelming. My teachers came forward, talking about how my grades had slipped, how I'd sometimes come to school looking exhausted or hungry. My manager from the coffee shop testified about my work ethic, how I'd sometimes beg for extra shifts even when I was dead on my feet. With each testimony, I watched Mom shrink a little more in her seat. But the final blow came from an unexpected source. Mom's sponsor from Gamblers Anonymous broke the code of anonymity to testify. She stood up in court and laid it all out: Mom's severe addiction, her repeated relapses, her refusal to truly engage with the program. That was the moment Mom finally broke. As the sponsor spoke, I saw something crumble in Mom's eyes. When she took the stand, gone was the defiant, lying woman I'd known for years. In her place was someone small, broken, and finally, honest. "I have a problem," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've hurt my daughter. I've betrayed her trust. I've ruined everything." As I watched my mother break down on the stand, confessing to years of addiction and neglect, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was relieved to finally hear her admit the truth. Part of me was angry that it had taken this long, that it had to come to this. And part of me, a part one wasn't proud of, felt a grim satisfaction seeing her finally face the consequences of her actions. But mostly, I felt tired. So incredibly, bone-deep tired. As Mom's sobs echoed through the courtroom, I closed my eyes, hoping that somehow, some way, this nightmare was finally coming to an end. The judge's gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the courtroom. In the matter of custody for Monica Thompson, the court rules in favor of Elizabeth Thompson. Linda Thompson's parental rights are hereby terminated. Dad was given a chance to step up, to fight for custody, but he didn't even show up to the hearing. His lawyer simply stated that Mark Thompson would not be contesting Elizabeth's guardianship. Just like that, both my parents had washed their hands of me. True to her word, Grandma Elizabeth sold Mom's house. She combined the proceeds with her own savings to set up a new trust fund for my education. This time, it was ironclad: the money could only be used for tuition, books, and other school-related expenses. No one, not even Elizabeth herself, could touch it for anything else. As my high school graduation approached, Grandma and I spent our weekends getting ready for my next big step. She'd bought me a small apartment near the college I'd chosen, and we had fun picking out furniture and decorating it. As we worked, we talked about my plans for the future. I'd decided to major in social work, with a minor in psychology. After everything I'd been through, I wanted to help other kids who were struggling. But even as I settled into my new life, I couldn't shake the conflicting emotions that churned inside me. I was relieved to finally have stability, to know where my next meal was coming from and not have to worry about keeping the lights on. But I also felt guilty. What would happen to Mom now? And as much as I tried to push it down, I was angry. Angry at Mom for her addiction, at Dad for his indifference, at both of them for failing me so completely. Grandma, perceptive as always, noticed my struggle. "Honey," she said gently one day, "I think it might be good for you to talk to someone. A professional, I mean. Someone who can help you process everything that's happened." It wasn't easy. Dredging up old memories, confronting feelings I'd tried so hard to bury, some days I left my sessions feeling wrung out and raw. But slowly, I started to heal. I learned that it was okay to be angry, to be sad, to grieve for the childhood I never had. I learned that my parents' failures weren't my fault, and that I didn't owe them my forgiveness until I was ready to give it, if ever. As I packed up my things, ready to move into my new apartment and start my college journey, I made a difficult decision. I wasn't going to reach out to Mom or Dad. Not yet, maybe not for a long time. I needed to focus on myself, on building the life I wanted, free from their chaos and disappointment. As we drove towards my new apartment, towards my new life, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, I knew that. There would be tough days, days when the old pain and anger would resurface. But for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt hope. Real, genuine hope for my future. I was Monica Thompson. I was a survivor. And now, finally, I had the chance to become so much more. My name is Jennifer, and I've spent most of my life alone. My parents died in a car accident when I was just 5, leaving me to be raised by my grandmother. She was my everything, my anchor, my guide, my only family. When she passed away shortly before my wedding, I thought I'd found a new family in Mark, my then fiancé. We'd been married for 2 years, living in a beautiful 2-story townhouse I'd rented before our wedding. It was in a perfect location, and when we got married, it made sense to stay there. Mark moved his things in, and I genuinely believed we had the perfect setup. I worked from home as an assistant editor-in-chief at a major publishing house, which meant I could manage both my career and our home life effectively. You know what's great about this house? Mark would often say, sprawled on our couch after dinner. It's big enough for family visits. My folks would love it here. I'd smile nervously whenever he brought this up. Yeah, maybe, I'd reply, trying to hide my discomfort. The thought of house guests made me uneasy, but I never really expressed this to Mark. Everything changed the day his sister Sarah showed up unannounced with her 2 elementary school-aged kids, Tommy and Lisa. I still remember opening the door and seeing them standing there, luggage in hand. "Surprise!" Sarah exclaimed, pushing past me into the house. "The kids need some quality time with their uncle. You know, male influence and all that." I stood there, frozen, as her children, Tommy and Lisa, ran straight to our pristine living room with muddy shoes. Mark appeared behind me, beaming with joy. "Jen, isn't this great? The kids can stay in the guest room, and Sarah can take the office." "The office?" I stammered. "But that's where I work." "You can work anywhere, honey," he said, already carrying their bags upstairs. "It's just for the school holidays." That first night, as I lay awake listening to the chaos downstairs, Sarah's kids fighting over the TV remote, Sarah complaining about the dinner I'd made, I had no idea this was just the beginning. I couldn't have known that this moment would set in motion a series of events that would completely unravel my marriage. The next few weeks were absolute hell. Sarah's kids were completely out of control. I'd never seen children behave this way before, and I'd edited plenty of young adult books about troubled teens. "Hey, stupid lady," Tommy would yell at me across the breakfast table, his hands covered in what I hoped was just mud. "I want pancakes." "Tommy," I'd try to reason with him, "first, please wash your hands, and second, my name is Jennifer or Aunt Jen." "Whatever, dummy," Lisa would chime in, deliberately spilling her orange juice on the floor. "Mom says we don't have to listen to you, because you're not really family." I'd look at Sarah, expecting her to correct them, but she'd just sit there scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing up to say things like, "Kids will be kids," or "They're just expressing themselves." One particularly trying morning, I was trying to meet a crucial deadline for work when Sarah barged into my makeshift workspace in the living room. "The kids need lunch," she announced, as if I was her personal chef. "Something organic and sugar-free. Maybe some hand-pressed juice and gluten-free sandwiches?" "Sarah, I have a really important deadline," I started. "Oh please," she interrupted, rolling her eyes. "You just sit at home all day typing. That's not real work." Unlike being a mother. The days blurred together in an endless cycle of cooking, cleaning, and trying to salvage my work responsibilities. The kids would trash their rooms daily, wipe their dirty hands on the walls, and throw food during meals. The worst part? Mark seemed completely blind to it all. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the school holidays ended. The morning Sarah and the kids left, I took Mark aside for a serious conversation. "Mark, we need to talk about what just happened," I said, still exhausted from the ordeal. "What do you mean? It was great having them here," he replied, genuinely puzzled. "No, it wasn't. Your sister's kids were completely disrespectful, she didn't lift a finger to help, and I couldn't get any work done." Please, don't invite anyone else without discussing it with me first. Mark looked taken aback, but nodded. Okay, honey, I promise I'll talk to you first next time. I spent the next few weeks trying to restore both our home and my mental health. The walls needed repainting, the furniture required deep cleaning, and my work deadlines had piled up dangerously high. During this time, I also remembered something important about our lease agreement. Mark, I said one evening, I should mention that our landlord is really strict about guests. The agreement has specific clauses about it. He waved his hand dismissively. Don't worry about that. Actually, why don't we just put the lease in my name? That way, you won't have to stress about it anymore. We transferred the lease to his name the next day, though I continued to pay the rent from my account as usual. 6 months passed, and life had finally returned to normal. Or so I thought. I was catching up on work one Tuesday morning when I heard Mark's excited voice from the kitchen. Of course you can stay with us, Mom. We have plenty of room. You and Dad can take the master bedroom. We'll move downstairs to the guest room. My stomach dropped. I rushed to the kitchen just in time to hear his mother saying something about sewage repairs and water being cut off at their house. Mark, I whispered urgently, tugging at his sleeve. Can we talk about this first? He covered the phone with his hand. Mom and Dad need a place to stay while their plumbing gets fixed. What's there to talk about? That evening, we had our first real fight in months. You promised me, Mark. You promised we'd discuss these things together. What do you want me to do, Jen? He snapped. They're my parents. I can't leave them without running water. Stop being so selfish. The next morning, my in-laws arrived with enough luggage to survive an apocalypse. Within hours, my mother-in-law, Linda, had rearranged my kitchen cabinets, criticized my choice of cleaning products, and commented on the layer of dust on the windowsills. Jennifer, dear, she called from the living room, where she was directing her husband Bob about furniture placement. When you're done with whatever it is you do on that computer, we'll need dinner. Something substantial, not those silly salads you make. I gritted my teeth. Linda, I'm actually working right now. I have a deadline. Working? She laughed, looking at Bob. Sitting at home all day isn't work. Now, about dinner. Days blurred together. I'd try to write emails while Linda stood over my shoulder, commenting on my posture. I'd be editing manuscripts while she demanded I do the laundry properly. Apparently, I'd been folding sheets wrong my entire adult life. Mark, I pleaded one evening, I need help. I can't keep up with everything. You're right, he said, and for a moment, I felt relief. I should take some time off work. I smiled, grateful, until he added, Dad and I are thinking about a fishing trip. Get some real father-son bonding time. A fishing trip? I couldn't believe my ears. That's not what I meant. But he was already packing his gear, excited as a kid at Christmas. The next morning, he and Bob left for their bonding experience, leaving me alone with Linda. Well, she said, hands on her hips as the door closed behind them. Since you're not busy with that little computer job of yours, we can finally get this house properly organized. I looked at my laptop, where 3 urgent emails from my boss sat unanswered, then at Linda's determined face. In that moment, I realized something had fundamentally shifted in my marriage, and not for the better. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, only a day after Mark and his father left for their fishing trip, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Sarah standing there with Tommy and Lisa, surrounded by even more luggage than last time. Surprise! She pushed past me, kids in tow. The children have been crying for their grandparents. We couldn't stay away. I stood in the doorway, my mind refusing to process what was happening. Linda appeared behind me, squealing with delight. My babies! She hugged the children. Sarah, darling, you're just in time. Jennifer was about to start dinner. I wasn't about to start dinner. I was about to join a critical video call with my publishing team. But nobody cared about that. Actually, I have an important work meeting. Always with the excuses, Sarah rolled her eyes. Mom told me you just sit at that computer all day pretending to work. The next few days were absolute torture. While Mark and Bob were off enjoying their fishing trip, I was trapped in a house of chaos. The kids ran wild through every room, leaving destruction in their wake. Sarah spent her days video calling friends, complaining about my cooking. Linda criticized everything I did. Nobody lifted a finger to help, but they all had opinions about how I wasn't doing enough. When Mark and his father finally returned from their fishing trip 5 days later, I was ready for a serious conversation. I'd rehearsed it in my head, firm but fair, explaining how impossible the situation had become. But before I could get a word in, Mark burst through the door, beaming with joy. "Isn't this amazing?" He spread his arms wide, taking in the chaos of our once peaceful home. "The whole family together. We should do this more often." I felt the room spin. "More often?" "Yeah, Dad and I were talking while fishing, and you know what would be great? If we all lived together for a while. Like a real family." The children ran past us, tracking mud across the floor I'd just cleaned. Sarah yelled from upstairs about needing fresh towels. Linda appeared to remind me it was almost dinner time. "Mark," I managed to choke out, "can we talk privately?" "Later, honey," he waved me off. Dad's showing everyone the pictures from our trip. That night, I lay awake in our cramped guest room, listening to the chaos above. Our bedroom, now occupied by his parents, creaked with every movement. Sarah's kids were still running around despite the late hour. Someone was using the microwave. Again. My phone buzzed with another email from my boss, "Second missed deadline this week. We need to talk." My life had become a nightmare. I was surrounded by strangers who treated me like their personal maid, children who destroyed everything they touched, and a husband who couldn't, or wouldn't, see what was happening. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to get some work done before everyone else got up. I'd started barricading myself in the home office, my last sanctuary in this chaos. But when I opened the door, my heart sank. Sarah was sitting at my desk, my laptop open in front of her, while Tommy and Lisa sprawled on the floor surrounded by construction paper, glue, and what looked like half the garden's worth of dirt. "Oh good, you're up." Sarah didn't even look at me. "The kids have a school project due tomorrow. We're using your laptop for research." "That's my work laptop," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have deadlines." "Don't be so selfish," Sarah cut me off. "This is for their education. You can do your little typing job later." I found Mark in the kitchen, grabbing his briefcase for work. "Mark, they've taken over my office. They're using my laptop. I can't work." "Not now, Jen," he rushed past me, checking his watch. "I'm late for a meeting. Just share the laptop, okay? It's for the kids' school." Feeling dizzy, I headed to the bathroom. Maybe a shower would help me think clearly. But when I opened the bathroom door, I nearly vomited. The toilet was overflowing with mud and dirt. Footprints tracked through the mess across the tile floor. Handprints decorated the walls. "Oh yeah," Lisa's voice piped up behind me. "We needed somewhere to mix the dirt for our project. Tommy said the toilet would be good, 'cause it has water already." I stood there, staring at the destruction. Somewhere in the house, I could hear Linda complaining about lunch plans. Sarah was yelling at the kids to get more supplies for their project. The toilet gurgled ominously. Something inside me snapped. Without saying a word, I cleaned up the bathroom. Every swipe of the mop, every scrub of the walls felt like another nail in the coffin of my marriage. When I finished, I went to our bedroom, the guest room now, and looked around at what my life had become. The next morning, I waited until Mark left for work. I listened to his car pull out of the driveway, counted to 60, then moved with quiet efficiency. I packed a small bag, some clothes, toiletries, my phone charger. The only thing I really needed was my laptop, which I managed to recover from the office while Sarah was in the kitchen complaining about the breakfast I hadn't made. Nobody noticed when I slipped out the front door. Nobody called out to ask where I was going. The hotel I checked into wasn't fancy, but it had 3 things my house no longer offered: silence, privacy, and peace. For the first time in weeks, I could hear myself think. I took the longest shower of my life, ordered room service, and actually managed to get some work done. I kept expecting my phone to explode with messages. Surely Mark would notice I was gone. Surely he'd be worried. Surely someone would wonder where the person who did all the cooking and cleaning had disappeared to. But as the hours ticked by, my phone remained silent. No missed calls. No frantic text messages. No concern at all for where I'd gone or why. After 3 days of silence, I decided to go home. Not because I missed them, but because I needed answers. As I approached our front door, I heard music and laughter spilling out into the street. What I walked into felt like a punch to the gut. A full-blown party was in progress. Streamers hung from the ceiling, plates of food covered every surface, and dozens of unfamiliar faces filled our living room. Nobody noticed me slip inside. Through the crowd, I spotted Mark dancing with Sarah in the middle of the room, both of them laughing. More relatives I'd never met were sprawled across our furniture, drinking and chatting as if they owned the place. I moved through the party like a ghost, until I found myself near the kitchen. That's when I heard them. And the best part is, my mother-in-law was saying to a woman I didn't recognize, we didn't have to spend a dime on hotels or restaurants. No repairs needed at our house at all, we just needed a change of scenery. The woman chuckled. Clever. And you got a free housewife out of the deal too. Yes, that Jennifer, Linda's voice dripped with contempt. Though she's not much of a housewife. Always complaining about her work. Can you believe she actually ran away 3 days ago? Not that anyone misses her cooking. They burst into laughter. I stood frozen, their words hitting me like physical blows. It had all been a lie. The broken sewage system, the urgent repairs, all of it fabricated so they could have a free vacation at my expense. Something inside me snapped. I pushed through the crowd until I found Mark, still dancing and drinking without a care in the world. We need to talk, I grabbed his arm. Now. He followed me to the hallway, looking annoyed at being pulled away from his fun. Your mother just told everyone there were never any repairs needed at their house, I said, my voice shaking. They just wanted a free place to stay. Did you know about this? He shrugged, and in that casual gesture, I saw our entire marriage crumble. So what if I did? Their family, they needed a break. A break? I'm the one who cooked for them, cleaned for them, while they insulted me and took over my home. And you knew it was all a lie? Oh, stop being so dramatic, he sneered. You don't understand because you're an orphan. The word orphan hit me like a slap. Images flashed through my mind, the car accident that took my parents when I was 5, my grandmother raising me alone, her empty seat at our wedding. That's right, he continued, his voice cruel. You're just a lonely loser who doesn't understand what it means to have a real, close-knit family. Maybe if you had one, you wouldn't be such a selfish bitch. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Without a word, I walked to our former bedroom and gathered what remained of my belongings. Behind me, the party continued as if nothing had happened. No one tried to stop me. Not even Mark. I'd barely settled into my hotel room and started apartment hunting online when my phone rang. Seeing the landlord's number flash across my screen made my stomach clench. Jennifer, Mr. Peterson's voice was tight with tension. I've been receiving numerous complaints from the neighbors about your property. My former property, I corrected him. I don't live there anymore. The lease was transferred to Mark Thompson, my husband, remember? There was a heavy pause on the line. Yes, well. The neighbors are reporting loud parties, excessive noise at all hours, children running wild in the common areas, and multiple unauthorized residents. That sounds terrible, I said, keeping my voice neutral. But as I said, it's not my responsibility anymore. Mr. Peterson sighed deeply. I want you to know that I'll be forced to take the harshest measures allowed under the lease agreement. I'm only calling you as a courtesy because you were such a good tenant for so long. I appreciate the heads up, I replied, but you'll need to discuss this with Mark. After hanging up, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I didn't bother warning Mark about the call. Let him deal with the consequences of his choices for once. I found a lovely one-bedroom apartment in a quiet building across town. The landlady was a retired teacher who lived downstairs and appreciated that I worked from home. It's good to have someone around during the day, she said. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night without being awakened by midnight snacks or early morning chaos. Then, 2 weeks into my peaceful new life, Mark called. "Jen, we're in serious trouble," he blurted before I could speak. "Peterson showed up today with a stack of papers. He's demanding double rent for the month plus some ridiculous fine." I continued typing my email, letting him ramble. "Did you know it was against the lease to have overnight guests? Or parties? Why didn't you tell me?" "I did tell you," I replied calmly. "Multiple times. You didn't want to listen." "Well, I didn't read the whole thing when we transferred it," he admitted. "Look, can you talk to Peterson? He liked you. Maybe you can explain." "Explain what?" I cut him off. "That you moved your entire extended family into a rental property without permission? That you've been hosting parties and disturbing the neighbors? That you ignored every warning I gave you about the lease agreement? The neighbors called the police last night," he continued desperately. "Mom and Dad got fined for noise violations. Sarah's kids were running through the building at midnight and someone complained. We need your help, Jen. You know how to handle these things." I thought about all the times I'd handled things for them. All the times I'd cleaned up their messes, literal and figurative. "No," I said simply. "No? What do you mean, no?" "I mean no. You have a whole big, close-knit family there to help you. Remember? The real family you said I wouldn't understand because I'm just a lonely orphan? Goodbye, Mark." I hung up mid-plea, turned my phone off, and went back to work. For the first time in months, I smiled. Sometimes karma doesn't need any help at all. The day after Mark's desperate call about the fines, my phone rang again. His name flashed on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. But something told me I should hear whatever he had to say. "They're gone," he said without preamble. "Mom, Dad, Sarah, the kids, they all left. Come home, Jen. We can go back to how things were." I almost laughed at the suggestion. Go back? As if the past months could be erased like crayon marks from a wall. "There's no going back, Mark. Please," his voice cracked. "Peterson's asking for so much money. Maybe we could split the costs? Half the fine and the double rent? I can't afford it on my own." This time I did laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that surprised even me. "Oh, now you want to split things fairly? Where was this concern for fairness when I was cooking and cleaning for your entire family? When they took over my office, my home, my life? But what about your real, close-knit family?" I interrupted. "Surely they'll help you pay. After all, I'm just a lonely orphan who doesn't understand family values, remember?" A week later, I heard through our mutual friend Amy that Peterson had evicted Mark. She told me he'd shown up at his parents' doorstep with his bags, only to be turned away. The irony was almost poetic. Mark's final call came as I was finishing dinner in my peaceful new apartment. My divorce papers lay on the coffee table, filed that morning. "Please, Jen," he begged. "I've lost everything, the house, my family. I made a mistake. We could start over. I've learned my lesson." I looked around my small but tranquil apartment. My laptop sat on my desk where I'd left it. My coffee mug was exactly where I'd placed it. No crayon on the walls, no mud on the floors, no chaos in the kitchen. "You're right about one thing, Mark," I said quietly. "You did lose everything. But you lost it yourself, one choice at a time." Every time you chose your family over our marriage. Every time you dismissed my feelings. Every time you watched them disrespect me and said nothing. I can change. I've already filed for divorce, I cut him off. And no, this isn't up for discussion. You showed me exactly who you are and what I mean to you. Consider it a gift, now I'll never waste another moment wondering. I hung up and blocked his number. Outside my window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. On my desk, a fresh manuscript waited for my attention. My phone remained blessedly silent. Sometimes, I think about what my grandmother would say if she could see me now. She always told me that family isn't about blood, it's about love, respect, and loyalty. She was right, of course. She usually was. I might be an orphan, as Mark so cruelly pointed out, but I finally understood something important. Being alone isn't the same as being lonely. And sometimes, the family you're born with or marry into isn't the family you deserve. Sometimes, you have to save yourself. And that's exactly what I did.